Hey guys. Tonight, we slide into a steaming Roman kitchen where cracked amphora leaks garum by the hearth and breakfast involves dipping bread into wine that tastes like vinegar and ambition. You can smell goat cheese left out too long, sour olives in clay bowls, and just a hint of fermented fish sauce wafting through the atrium like a curse. It's the kind of morning where you wake up and immediately ask yourself, do I have to eat this? And yes, you probably won't survive this. Romans had stomachs lined with lead. Literally. Sometimes. And taste buds more adventurous than ours on a dare. If you're expecting pancakes and scrambled eggs, you're going to be very disappointed and possibly poisoned. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and local time. I love seeing where you guys are watching from. Historians still argue whether breakfast was really widespread across all classes or mostly a wealthy custom. Ancient texts don't always agree. And much of what we know comes from the elite's writings, which, let's face it, is like learning about your average Tuesday by reading a billionaire's diary. You wake up on a stiff straw mattress in a domus, the private home of a wealthy Roman who's letting you stay the night out of either generosity or curiosity. The house smells like old marble, warm bread, and something vaguely pickled. Breakfast is already being prepared in the kulina, and you trudge over barefoot, ready for something edible. You're handed a bowl of pulsa barley porridge that's more texture than taste and a hunk of coarse bread. Not toasted. No butter. Just bread. There's cheese, too. From a goat who probably knows all your secrets. And wine. Yes. Wine. For breakfast. But don't get excited. It's been watered down until it tastes like a sad memory. Romans didn't drink water straight unless they had no other choice. It wasn't always safe. So you sip this diluted red that smells faintly like raisins and regret and wonder why everyone around you is acting like this is totally normal. A slave carries in a small bowl of olives, wrinkled and oil-soaked. You bite into one. It's briny and rich. And you finally get it. This is the Roman idea of a good morning. Not indulgent. Not hearty. Just functional. Fuel for the day ahead. Where you might be arguing politics, inspecting a bathhouse, or possibly conquering Gaul. Breakfast wasn't a lavish affair for most Romans. In fact, for the lower classes freedmen, laborers, slaves, it was often skipped or reduced to crusts left from last night's loaf. Maybe some beans. A few dried figs if you were lucky. You chew slowly, taking in the fact that this is the entaculum, the first meal of the day, and no one's offering bacon, not even a sausage, just grain mush and goat dairy. You notice a curious jar sitting on the windowsill. It's sealed with wax and smells faintly fishy. You poke it. A servant shakes his head. Garum, he mutters. Like that explains everything. You crack the seal and instantly wish you hadn't. It's fermented fish sauce, made by layering fish guts with salt and leaving it in the sun until the gods themselves weep. And Romans loved it. Put it on everything. Loved it. They slathered it on eggs, mixed it into wine, even baked it into desserts. You bravely dab a bit onto your barley mush. It's salty. Unapologetic. Funky in the way Blue cheese is funky, only multiplied by 10 and blessed by Neptune. And weirdly, you don't hate it. You're also not entirely sure your nose will ever recover. There's also honey. In a tiny pot, real honey was precious, expensive, and sometimes used to cover up less than fresh ingredients. You drizzle a bit over your goat cheese, and it almost makes you forget you're eating something that may have sat out overnight in a Roman summer. For elites, breakfast might include pastries made with flour, oil, and pepperies. Pepper. Romans used pepper like it was going out of style. There's even a sweet cake here laced with dates and black peppercorns. Soft and strangely spicy. You eat 2, maybe 3. Then comes the real twist. You're told that in certain Roman cults, the breakfast wasn't just about food, it was a ritual. Initiates in the Mithraic mystery religion, for example, often held secret feasts at dawn, eating in darkness, sometimes underground. Not creepy at all. Just you, your fellow initiates, and possibly a sacrificial bull lurking nearby. Breakfast and blood rites, served with a side of spirituality. You pass a tiny shrine in the corner of the kitchen. The lairs, household gods, get their share of the morning meal. A crust of bread, a smear of cheese, a drop of wine poured with reverence. Superstition is steeped into every bite. You eat not just to nourish yourself, but to appease the ancestors, honor the gods, and maybe not get cursed before lunch. Speaking of which, don't expect much more before noon. The next meal, prandium, isn't coming until later, and you'll need to make it through hours of work, lawmaking, or forced participation in someone's dramatic poetry, reading first. You down the last of your wine water and try to look dignified as a bit of barley porridge clings to your lip. The servant clears your bowl and offers you a final treat, a date stuffed with pine nuts, drizzled in more honey. You bite into it and nearly forgive them for the garum. Nearly. You step out into the sunlight of a Roman morning, stomach mildly full and tongue tingling from all the fermented chaos. And somehow, despite the goat cheese, the wine for breakfast, and the fish sauce that might haunt your dreams, you feel ready to face the day. Welcome to breakfast in Rome. Hope you brought antacids. You're already slightly queasy from the fish-scented breakfast, and wondering if this is why everyone in togas looks mildly distressed all the time. But now it's midday, and you've trudged your sandal-wearing feet across dusty stone streets to the center of Roman life, the Forum. Merchants shout. Senators stroll dramatically. Someone's arguing about water rights, while another man sells roasted chickpeas out of a cart that probably hasn't been cleaned since Augustus was a toddler. This is where you grab your prandium. Your second meal of the day, though calling it a meal might be a stretch. It's more of a socially acceptable excuse to shove olives and bread into your face between public duties. You hover near a bench under a fig tree and unwrap what's essentially your packed lunch, a slice of leftover flatbread, a hunk of cold-boiled egg, a few wilted lettuce leaves, and a smudge of garum that somehow leaked onto everything. As usual, Romans weren't exactly culinary romantics at lunchtime. Most people, especially the working poor, ate what they had on hand. Cold beans, a hunk of cheese, some leftover lentils. If you were lucky, maybe a handful of dried fruit. You try chewing a fig that feels like it spent a week in someone's pocket. Still tastes better than the wine from breakfast. Now and then, someone strolls by eating moretuma, garlic-heavy cheese paste that smells like a direct assault. It's mashed with herbs, oil, vinegar, and sometimes nuts. You take a nibble from a communal bowl? Sanitary? Probably not. And your sinuses clear, so suddenly you see Jupiter. A merchant nearby snorts. Cleans the blood, he says. And the neighbors? Oh, historians still argue whether lunch had any real social importance. Some say it was just functional. Others think it carried subtle class. Distinctionsalites didn't rush it, while the rest of Rome scarfed food standing up. Based on how fast everyone around you eats, you're leaning towards survival snack over dining experience. You head toward a Papana Roman snack, barone of the only food joints where commoners can buy a hot meal. Inside, the counter is decorated with little bowls sunk into stone. Still bubbling with stews and grains, you're handed a small wooden bowl of lentil mush and a chunk of spiced sausage known as botulus. The sausage is heavy. It might contain actual meat, or organ, or bread. Possibly all three. You try not to ask questions. One man dips a bit of stale bread into his wine. You copy him. The bread softens into something that tastes like despair and vinegar. But hey, at least your jaw gets a break. Someone offers you a street skewer charred bits of meat. Probably goat. Possibly pigeon. It smells decent, especially once dipped in a smear of date syrup. You chew, trying to appear grateful, while a child nearby gnaws happily on a roasted mouse. Yes, a mouse. Romans had no qualms about rodents. They even raised special dormice for fancy dinners. This one's probably just a common one, but still crunchy tail and all. Some vendors sell tiny honey cakes shaped like fish, stuffed with chopped nuts and poppy seeds. They look adorable, until you remember that fish-shaped dessert is only charming when there isn't literal fish in your dessert. Which, knowing Rome, is not guaranteed. You watch a group of builders dig into bowls of barley porridge topped with wilted greens. It's peasant food, but filling. There's something quietly noble about how they eat it. 2. No complaints. No flavors wasted. Just honest foil. You nod in solidarity, chewing your own lentils. Now comes the weird part. You notice that wealthier men aren't really eating much. Senators mostly sip wine and nibble. Their midday meal is deliberately light. Why? Because the heavy, ridiculous, multi-course dinner is coming. You catch one senator tossing grapes to his pet monkey. The monkey's eating better than you are. One woman seated behind you picks at a salad made of mint, endive, vinegar, and cucumbers. No dressing, just herbs and sourness. It's refreshing in the way a thunderstorm is refreshing, lightly violent and oddly cleansing. She offers you a taste. You accept, and your eyes water a little. Good for the liver. She shrugs. You wonder what ancient Roman livers had to endure that everything seems to be good for them. You take a moment to appreciate that while Roman lunches weren't glamorous, they were practical, balanced-ish. There's grain, protein, a little fruit. The diet of the average Roman was shockingly vegetarian compared to the modern Western world. Not by choice, but by cost. Meat was expensive. Even fish was a luxury unless you lived by the coast. Most Romans lived off bread, legumes, and whatever the land or market gave them that day. And yet, you get the sense that even simple food had its rituals. One man crushes herbs with a tiny bronze mortar, mixing a pinch into his beans. Another slices garlic so fine it curls. Even in poverty, flavor matters. You watch, chew, breathe through the constant fish stink in the air, and realize Rome was built on lentils and grit, and maybe just a little bit of spite. You finish your meal just as someone calls out about a riot starting down near the grain market. Standard Tuesday. You wipe your hands on your tunic and toss the rest of your lentil paste to a passing dog, who accepts it with surprising dignity. Lunch is over. The city groans and lurches toward the late afternoon heat, where shadows grow long and senators retreat to their villas. You follow the smell of incense and olive oil toward the baths. Stomach humming with garlic and fermented dreams. Dinner is coming. And this time, it's unhinged. You survive the afternoon with only mild heartburn and a vague sense that you've ingested more garlic than any one person should. Rome simmers under the weight of its own grandeur as the sun dips lower and the shadows stretch like yawns across the cobbled streets. Vendors begin closing their stalls. Children chase each other through alleyways, slick with spilled olive oil. And the smell of roasting something, maybe lamb, maybe pigeon, maybe mythical creature, starts to curl through the air. Dinner is the main event. This is where things go from simple rustic food culture to full-on culinary theater. You're invited to a banquet. Not just any banquet, this one's hosted by a minor noble who insists on being called Lucius the Tasteful, which, based on the gold trim on his sandals and the peacock feathers in his wine goblet, is probably ironic. You arrive just before dusk. The atrium glows with lamplight, flickering over mosaics of Neptune brandishing a fish, and you're greeted by a slave with a dish of rosewater for your hands. You wash. You try not to trip on the tiger skin rug. You are then gently but firmly guided to a couch, the kind made for reclining, not sitting, because here, you don't sit at dinner. You lounge. You sprawl. You strike poses that would make modern chiropractors scream. It's all part of the performance. Then comes the gusttatio, the appetizer course. The first dish? Dormice? Yes. Actual mice. Specially raised. Delicately stuffed with herbs. Minced meat. Pine nuts. And sometimes honey. You hesitate. They're presented with a flourish, and Lucius claps his hands like a proud father. You take a bite. It's oddly tender, like nutmeg-scented meatballs, if you close your eyes and forget the tiny limbs. After the dormice, you're served pickled eggs, dressed snails, and small fried fish served whole bones, eyes, and all. Garum, of course, is involved. It's drizzled over everything like the Romans were trying to make up for not having ketchup. One man beside you spoons garum into his wine. No one stops him. Historians still argue whether Roman banquets were always this absurd, or if writers like Petronius exaggerated for satire. Based on the flamingo tongues now being paraded around the room on silver platters, you suspect satire wasn't far off the mark, but neither was the absurdity. The prima mensa, or main course, follows. You brace yourself. First, roast boar stuffed with live thrushes. Yes, Liv. The idea is that when the boar is sliced open, birds fly out. This is what counts as dinner and entertainment. The birds do fly, knocking over 2 goblets and a man's dignity. Next is a stew of eel and fig. The eel was alive moments ago, and the fig sauce is spiced so heavily it tastes like a cinnamon experiment gone rogue. You try it anyway. The texture is somewhere between slippery and resentful. There's a dish of roasted crane, served with a sauce made from fermented fish, honey, vinegar, and crushed dates. Someone nearby calls it sweet and sour, and you immediately regret ever thinking modern food invented that idea. Lucius beams as the next course is wheeled into a platter, holding what looks like an entire ostrich. Featherless, roasted, and garnished with pomegranate seeds and gold leaf. You're not even surprised anymore. You've stopped asking questions. You're in too deep. You take a slice and pretend it doesn't taste faintly like slightly burnt beef that once tried to fly. Meanwhile, slaves move silently, refilling wine cups with mulsuma, mix of wine and honey. It's delicious, cloyingly sweet, and extremely strong. One senator falls asleep face down in his barley mash. Another starts reciting poetry about his dead cat. You sip and keep your head down. For dessert because, yes, dessert is a thing you're handed deep-fried pastries filled with cheese and drizzled with honey, called globy. They're warm, sweet, and blissfully free of garum. You eat 3, maybe 4. Then comes baked pears with wine reduction, a sweet custard laced with pepper, candied rose petals, a cake shaped like a temple. Someone cuts into it and finds a lizard inside, possibly on purpose. You realize, somewhere between the second slice of temple cake and the third refill of mulsum, that this isn't just dinner. This is a power flex. The more absurd the dish, the more powerful the host. Food becomes spectacle. Expense becomes entertainment. Taste? Optional. There's a whispered rumor that the emperor once served a dish of pearls dissolved in vinegar. Another guest insists someone else once cooked a stew of nightingales marinated in perfume. Historians still debate the truth of those accounts, but in this candlelit fever dream of a meal, you believe it entirely. A young poet takes the floor and recites a verse about figs, war, and lost love. No one listens. A musician plays the lyre. You think he's asleep with his eyes open. Someone near the door throws up discreetly behind a pillar, and a servant whisks it away like it never happened. That's Rome for you. The final course is silence. Not food, not music. Just the sound of a dozen overfed nobles trying to breathe around their togas. You recline, dazed, stomach stretched to ancient limits, and wonder how you'll ever eat a modern sandwich again without disappointment. A servant hands you a warm towel. Another pours rose water over your hands. You smell faintly of cinnamon, fish, and crushed flowers. You don't know if you're dreaming or just digesting too hard. Dinner in ancient Rome wasn't about hunger. It was about dominance, illusion, opulence, and absurdity. And now that you've survived it, you're part of the club. Sort of. Don't fall asleep on the couch. That's frowned upon. You wake up with what can only be described as a hangover made of honey. Fish sauce. and existential regret. Your tongue feels like it was marinated in vinegar. Your breath probably still smells like roasted crane and overconfidence. You sit up on the guest couch, carefully adjusting your toga, and glance around the empty atrium. Only a few plates remain, and one poor musician is curled under a table, cradling his lyre like it's seen too much. This, you realize, is how the Romans lived. And by lived, we really mean tested the boundaries of human digestion. But of all the culinary crimes committed in this empire, one item stands head and shoulders sand, possibly scales and bones above the rest. Garum, Rome's pride, everyone else's nightmare. Today, you're on a mission to see how the sausage gets made, only it's not sausage. It's fish guts. You head south, past the Forum, toward the port towns where the stuff was brewed like black market alchemy. The sun is hot. The road is lined with amphorae. And the air? It's already beginning to smell. Suspicious, you arrive at a garum workshop near the coast. It's not a factory. Exactly more like a hellish courtyard filled with stone vats and very enthusiastic flies. A worker greets you, smiling like this is the most normal thing in the world. You're just in time, he says. We're about to stir it. Ibs. Stir what? You ask. He gestures toward one of the vats. Inside is a thick, bubbling mix of small fish anchovies, mackerel, sardine-send, a whole lot of entrails. It's been sitting in salt under the Mediterranean sun for weeks, sometimes months. The trick, he says, is the fermentation. You want the bones soft, the flesh dissolved, and the smell strong enough to punch through marble. Oh. You fight every instinct in your body not to flee. Instead, you peer closer. The liquid's separated. There's a clear amber layer on top, that's the garum. The dark sludge at the bottom? That's for your enemies. They bottle the golden stuff into slender amphorae, seal it with wax, and ship it across the empire. From the damp kitchens of Britannia to the glittering feasts of Alexandria, everyone wants a taste. You dip your finger into a sample. You're not sure if it's a seasoning or a declaration of war. Either way, it's unforgettable. Historians still argue about garum's nutritional value. Some claim it was rich in amino acids and healthy fats. Others say it was saltier than Poseidon's armpit and barely edible. What's certain is this: Romans loved it. They hoarded it. They bathed food in it. Some even drank it straight, usually mixed with water and vinegar to make a medicinal tonic known as oxygarum. Spoiler alert: it did not cure anything except your appetite. You wander the workshop, learning the trade. Workers dump baskets of fresh fish into the vats like it's a spiritual offering. They chant measurements of salt like incantations. One man stirs with a long wooden paddle, nose covered with a strip of linen, eyes already glassy. He looks at you and says, "It builds character." Garum wasn't just for the elite. Even poor families used a cheaper, less filtered version called alec, made from the dregs. It was thicker, chunkier, and often used to stretch soups and stews. One pot of alec in a plebeian kitchen could make stale beans taste almost like something you'd willingly eat. Back in the city, you watch a cook at a modest tavern prepare lentils with garum, vinegar, and cumin. The smell is aggressive, but the result is oddly good savory. Tangy. Deep. Like soy sauce's weird Roman cousin with a fishy attitude problem, you slurp it down, trying not to imagine where it came from. Some recipes called for garum in everything. Eggs, cakes, vegetables, even desserts. One scroll describes pears poached in wine, honey, and garum. You try it. It tastes like someone sweet-talked a fish into a fruit salad. Not the worst thing you've had, but also not winning any prizes. The obsession with garum even made it a symbol of status. The most expensive kind, known as garum sociorum, came from specific regions and could cost more than perfume. Senators bragged about their garum vintages. Recipes were passed down like family heirlooms. You once saw a bottle with gold leaf on the label. Just what every fish sauce needs: branding. But beyond the smell and spectacle, garum reveals something deeper about Roman culture. It's a testament to their ingenuity, their thrift, and their complete lack of fear when it came to eating things that should, by all logic, be buried, not bottled. The same empire that built aqueducts and roads also perfected rotten fish juice and convinced millions it was gourmet. You wander into a nearby market, nose half numb, and notice garum being used in more subtle ways. A seller offers you boiled eggs dipped in garum and pepper. A baker has warm bread served with a garum and honey spread. A young girl eats carrots soaked in vinegar and garum like it's candy. You try each. Your stomach protests, then gives up. Acceptance is key. And yes, before you ask, there were garum scandals. People faked it, adulterated it, used subpar fish, or skipped fermentation. Entire riots broke out when a batch turned bad. One infamous senator allegedly died after being served counterfeit garum at a banquet. Historians still argue if he died from poison or shame. Even today, archaeologists dig up amphorae, still reeking faintly of the stuff. In Pompeii, in Spain, in Tunisia, you name it, the legacy of garum lingers like an olfactory ghost. Some say the ancient recipes are being revived by modern chefs. Others say those chefs should be arrested. As the sun sets over the coast, you return to the workshop one last time. The vats steam in the fading light. The worker hands you a small bottle. For the road. He grins. You pocket it with mixed feelings. It's a gift. It's a curse. It's garum. And in Rome, that means love. You're marching now. Not for glory. Not for conquest. But because your sandals are sticking to the road, and some ex-legionnaire cook just shouted that if you want to eat like a gladiator, you'd better earn it. So you trudge forward, shoulder to shoulder, with other would-be warriors. Stomach growling and brain wondering how on earth anyone survived with a diet based mostly on beans and vinegar. The training ground smells like sweat, dust, and bad decisions. You wipe your brow, stare at the sun, and follow the smoke trail leading to a large iron cauldron. Inside, pulls. Again. Of course, barley porridge was the foundation of a gladiator's diet, cheap, filling, and blessedly bland. The cook, a former soldier named Varro, ladles you a steaming portion and slaps your back hard enough to dislodge your spine. This version is thicker than the breakfast one, almost like cement. It's spiced with a bit of cumin and parsley. And someone's thrown in chickpeas for texture. You take a bite and chew for roughly 10 minutes. It's not bad, not exciting, but not actively threatening. Gladiators. Despite what Hollywood might suggest, we're not feasting on steaks and grapes between death matches. Their diet was plant-based, rich in carbs and low in fat, designed to bulk them up, not with lean muscle, but with padding. Why? Because a little extra flesh made wounds less lethal. Your job wasn't to win, it was to survive long enough to make the crowd cheer. Historians still argue about the exact composition of the gladiatorial diet. Some scrolls describe a high barley regimen. Others mention frequent use of legumes. What's clearer is that meat was rare, and exotic food like shellfish or game was reserved for showy banquets. Not the sand-slicked arena floor. You're handed a small cup filled with sour black liquid. Drink. The cook commands. You sniff. It smells like regret. Vinegar. And maybe a whisper of ash. This is posca, mix of vinegar, water, and sometimes herbs. Roman soldiers and gladiators swore by it. It quenched thirst, killed bacteria, and made you feel like your mouth was on vacation in a pickle barrel. You gag, swallow, and nod, like it's fine. It's not fine, but everyone's watching. There's no dessert, no second course, just more pulse. Someone's tossed in boiled leeks this time. One of the fighters near you mutters that a touch of garum would help, but the cook glares like he's just suggested poisoning Caesar. No fish sauce in my pot. He growls. This is honest food. Ew. And he's not wrong. Gladiator food was brutally honest. It was about survival, recovery, and building bodies that could withstand spears, swords, and spontaneous public opinion. Protein came from beans. Calcium came from a tonic made by grinding burned bones into powder, yes. Actual charred bones and mixing them with vinegar. You don't get offered any. You are grateful. You train between bites. Nothing fancy, just footwork. Shield drills. Controlled falls into sand. Then you eat again. More pools. Maybe a boiled fig if someone's feeling generous. You're starting to crave flavor, the way a poet craves applause. A healer walks by, checking wounds and occasionally smearing some mint salve on the deeper cuts. He also carries dried apples for blood sugar and dates for quick energy. You beg one off him. He gives you a half smile and tosses you a date. It tastes like hope. Later, around a campfire, the older fighters share stories. One swears he once tasted peacock. Another claims he was fed a honey-glazed lark before a high-profile match. You ask if that's true. He shrugs. Might have been pigeon. Hard to tell once it's fried. Despite the monotony, there's something satisfying about the meals. You know what's in them. You know they'll fuel you. And you know everyone else is eating the same thing. There's no competition here. Not for food. Just survival. Still, you can't help but envy the spectators. Lounging in their togas with wine and sausage skewers, while you chew another mouthful of barley and contemplate your mortality. Back at the barracks, you're given a small loaf of panissa rough, dark bread made from stone-ground grain. You bite in and immediately crunch something sharp. Not a rock. A bit of broken millstone. Happens all the time. Roman bread was notoriously gritty. Dentists in Pompeii would have made a fortune. You wash it down with more pasca. This time with a sprig of rosemary floating in it like a sad garnish. Someone toasts to the dead. Someone else burps. It's a vibe. Before bed. The cook offers a final snack boiled fava beans with a bit of mint and onion. You eat slowly, mindfully, not because you're fancy, but because your jaw hurts. You lie down on a straw mat, stomach stretched and humming with carbs. Your muscles ash. Your breath still smells like barley and vinegar. And your feet feel like they've walked across all of Gaul. And yet, you feel strong, because in Rome, food isn't about joy. It's about purpose, function, endurance. Tomorrow, you fight. Tonight, you digest. You wake to shouting, the clatter of sandals on tile, and the very distinct sound of someone arguing about whether peacock eggs are appropriate for breakfast. You roll over on your straw mat, the scent of oil lamps, and last night's garlic still clinging to your tunic. And, remember, you're not in a gladiator camp anymore. You're in the domus of a man with far too many statues of himself. Welcome to the private dinner court of Emperor Elagabalus. If you were hoping for subtlety, restraint, or even a predictable protein, forget it. Elagabalus is what happens when you give a teenage emperor absolute power, unlimited wine, and access to the strangest ingredients in the empire. You are about to dine at a table where the food might move, glow, or sing. You're escorted through a maze of corridors lined with silk curtains and gold-threaded cushions. Everything smells faintly of roses and expensive panic. A servant drapes a napkin over your lap that is somehow softer than your entire childhood. And you are handed a cup of something fizzy and pink. You sip. It tastes like flowers and fermented ambition. Then the parade begins. The first course arrives carried by no fewer than 6 attendants. It's a pyramid of songbird tongues. Not cooked, not grilled, preserved in rare myrrh and rose oil. Each delicately arranged on a slab of marble shaped like Mount Olympus. You blink. Somones nezes. A tongue falls. No one flinches. Elagabalus himself arrives in a robe, so sheer it might technically be a rumor. He reclines beside you, plucks a songbird tongue from the display, and drops it into his mouth with the glee of someone who's never balanced a budget. He turns to you and winks. Tonight, he whispers, you shall taste heaven. Oh. You consider bolting, but it's too late. The next course arrives. It's camel heels in saffron jelly. Yes, camel heels. They glisten ominously. You take a bite. It's gelatinous. Cheve, like a sandal, soaked in pudding. Elagabalus giglis. Historians still argue whether this emperor's feasts were exaggerated by ancient gossips or whether he truly did serve meals on gold dishes. Throw flower petals so thick they suffocated guests, and once drowned a banquet in perfume, based on the hummingbird wing salad now being fanned toward you with peacock feathers. You're leaning toward absolutely true. You manage a few polite nibbles of a dish that appears to be sea urchin stuffed with honey-glazed snails, garnished with powdered pearl. It crunches like it's judging you. Elagabalus claps delightedly. Then comes the coup de grace. Mice. Again. But not just any mice. These are roasted, stuffed with almonds, wrapped in pastry, and dipped in cinnamon syrup. They've been arranged into a reenactment of the founding of Rome. One of the mice has a tiny red cloak. Another carries a miniature spear. You reach for Romulus and bite off his tail. It's surprisingly spiced. Your stomach makes a small, distressed noise. You drink more wine. Next comes the salad. It's made from ices, shipped in from the mountains, shredded rose petals, and vinegar aged in amphorae buried beneath the temple of Jupiter. It tastes like winter and broken promises. The woman beside you cries. You don't ask why. You're handed a small egg. Phoenix egg. The server intones. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Quail. Really? But say phoenix? Or he pouts. You crack it open. Inside is a custard made from goat milk and saffron, spiced with cardamom and a whisper of madness. You nod approvingly. It's excellent. The main course arrives on a golden platter. A whole ostrich again with a note pinned to its neck that reads, Pliny would have loved this. The meat is tender. Surprisingly subtle after all you've endured. You dab your mouth with your napkin and try not to think about the fact that this bird probably outranked you socially. A slave appears holding a silver bowl. Inside, garum ice cream. Yes, they've done it. Frozen, fermented fish sauce. You taste it because you're brave. And because Elagabalus is watching, it's salty. Creamy. Absolutely wrong. He applauds your courage. There's a brief pause in the meal. A troupe of acrobats tumbles through the hall. A dwarf juggles figs soaked in wine. A monkey, dressed as a senator, recites a poem about cheese. Everyone claps. You question reality. Then the floor moves. Literally, you've read that Elagabalus once installed a rotating dining room ceiling. Turns out, the floor also turns. You spin slowly as dessert arrives. Honeyed locusts, fried in almond oil, resting on a bed of sugar-dusted nettles. They crunch like defiance. You eat too. A final dish appears. Something simple. A bowl of dates. Split open and stuffed with ground nuts and honey. You take one. It's sweet. Familiar. Grounding. A reminder that not everything in this mad emperor's world is gold-drenched chaos. Some things are just food. The meal ends with fireworks. Indoors. You duck. Petals rain from the ceiling. Musicians play a song composed entirely of lyre and goat bell. Elagabalus sighs contentedly. Murmurs something about ordering blue flamingos for breakfast. And promptly falls asleep in his pudding. You raise wobbly. Dubber full. Slightly traumatized and leave quietly. No one notices. They're too busy applauding a man who's swallowing a pearl whole, back on the street. You breathe deeply. The cool night air tastes like sanity. Your stomach hums with fear and syrup. You wonder if anything will ever taste normal again. And yet, somehow, you feel alive. Welcome to dinner with Elagabalus. You made it. Barely. You think you've recovered. You really do. After that fever dream feast with Elagabalus, You wander the quieter districts of Rome in search of something normal. Maybe a loaf of bread that hasn't been dipped in garum or laced with cinnamon-flavored poultry. You follow the scent of smoke and warm grain to a pistrina, a Roman bakery tucked between two crumbling villas. The smell is honest: scorched flour, yeast, and the low hum of ash. You breathe it in like it's perfume. The baker, arms dusted in flour and forearms like tree trunks, greets you with a grunt and gestures toward the ovens. These aren't dainty hearths. They're massive, stone-lined monsters that burn all day. Fed with wood and curses, you step inside the warm gloom and immediately feel like you're home. Here, bread reigns supreme. It's the fuel of the empire, rich or poor, soldier or slave, everyone eats it. The most common variety is panis quadratus, a round loaf with deep scoring that makes it easy to divide. You pick one up. It's heavy, dense, rustic. You bite into it and immediately chip something. Yep, grit, stone particles. The Roman milling process used lava stone grinders, and over time, bits of the millstones ended up in the flour. Roman teeth paid the price. Historians still argue whether Romans adjusted their chewing to avoid damage or just accepted early dental ruin as part of the meal plan. You're leaning toward the latter as you massage your molar. Still, the bread itself is earthy and rich, made from emmer, wheat, or spelt. Not fluffy, not delicate. This is survival baked into a loaf. It's often eaten with oil, cheese, or dipped in wine, depending on your budget and emotional stability. The baker offers you a slice of panis militaris, the military-issue hardtack designed to last months. You tap it against the counter. It doesn't even flinch. You try a bite. It fights back. Hardtack wasn't about flavor. It was about bulk, shelf life, and the ability to survive being catapulted. Soldiers soaked it in broth or pasca just to make it chewable. You gnaw politely and swallow like a champion. The baker's assistant brings out a tray of panis plebeius common bread for the poor, made from bran, water, and dreams. It's darker and rougher, the kind of bread you eat because you must, not because you want to write poetry about it, but it's filling. You watch as a young mother tears a loaf in half for her kids, who munch on it like it's treasure. In a way, it is. Some loaves are flavored with cumin, coriander, or fennel. A vendor nearby sells panis alexandrinus, lightly sweetened and flecked with poppy seeds. It's more of a dessert, a treat for feast days or for people who still have teeth. You try a piece. It's soft, unexpectedly tender, a rare moment of gentleness in an empire built on concrete and conquest. But bread wasn't just food, it was politics. Grain distribution was tightly controlled. Rome's annona system kept the plebs from rioting by guaranteeing cheap or free grain. Miss a shipment, and you'd have a mob bigger than a centurion's ego. Bakers were both respected and tightly regulated. If a loaf was underweight, the consequences ranged from fines to beatings. And forget gluten-free. Wheat was life. Even the gods had grain offerings. Back in the shop, the baker shows you a loaf branded with a family C list to identify bread sent to public ovens. Some homes didn't have private hearths, so families prepped their dough and brought it to communal ovens. You imagine modern apartment dwellers lining up outside with sourdough starters and clay tags. There's a comforting communal rhythm to it. You help knead a batch of dough. It's sticky, alive, stubborn. The baker slaps it down with the grace of someone who's been doing this since Claudius was in diapers. He explains that the fermentation comes from sour Laveno packaged yeast here. Just time, temperature, and wild Roman air. While it rises, you eat more bread, a slice with fig jam, another with cheese, a chunk dipped in olive oil and sprinkled with salt. Simple, unscent, perfect. No gilded birds. Nah, edible pearls. Just wheat. Fire. And the magic that happens when people are hungry and flour is cheap. By evening, the loaves are cooled and stacked, ready for sale. Slaves carry baskets through the streets, calling out prices. A boy buys a roll for his grandfather. A girl tucks a heel of bread into her cloak. You take one more bite, still warm from the oven. And, in that moment, after mice pies and garum sorbet, you finally feel like a human again. Bread didn't try to impress you. It didn't puff itself with luxury or oddity. It just fed you, which, in a city like Rome, is its own quiet miracle. You leave the bakery with crumbs on your toga and a new appreciation for teeth. The streets of Rome are buzzing again, vendors shouting about olives, beggars eyeing figs, donkeys leaving opinions in the form of little gifts. You wander past a row of market stalls and catch the unmistakable scent of something sharp, pungent, and vaguely medicinal. Your nose twitches. Your stomach raises an eyebrow. Someone is frying radishes in olive oil. And honestly, it's not the worst thing you've smelled today. The Roman Macellum there version of a marketes, a chaotic ballet of commerce and conversation. Here, food isn't just sustenance. It's gossip, politics, bragging rights. You weave between stalls, offering everything from olives so black they shine like obsidian, to pickled dormice trussed up like finger foods. One woman offers you a taste of spiced carrot puree topped with pine nuts. You nod, trying not to cry. It's good. Soothing. She says it's a favorite among retired centurions with sensitive teeth. You move on to a dried fruit vendor. Dates, figs, and raisins spill out of baskets like edible treasure. You grab a handful of sun-dried fig sweet, chèvre, with a hint of ferment. Not fancy, but dépendable. Romans loved these snacks. Soldiers packed them. Philosophers chewed them while judging other philosophers. Even emperors munched them during long Senate debates, pretending not to be bored out of their minds. Across the plaza, a fishmonger slices up eel, like it's going out of fashion. It's slimy. Yes, but roasted eel glazed with honey and black pepper, surprisingly rich. A popular dish for middle-class Romans, looking to impress without blowing the inheritance. You try a bite. It's silky, warm, and deeply confusing. You imagine the average Roman dinner table groaning under the weight of this variety bread. Lentils, cabbage, grapes, leftover ostrich, if you're lucky. More garum, if you're not. A butcher waves you over. His stall smells like ambition and cured pork. On display are hams, sausages, livers, and something you hope is just a very large tongue. Meat was expensive and often reserved for special occasions. But the lower cutlungs, tripe, feet were standard fare for the working class. He offers you a slice of botulus, a Roman blood sausage spiced with lovage and leeks. It's earthy, metallic, and oddly comforting, like chewing on history with a side of onions. Historians still argue about just how often ordinary Romans ate meat. Some claim it was a rare treat. Others say the urban poor had more access than we assume, thanks to market overflow and communal stews. Either way, you get the sense that Romans were deeply pragmatic eaters. If it could be cooked, it would be, and if it couldn't, well, that's what vinegar and a good story were for. You pass a stall selling boiled snails on skewers. The vendor winks. You politely decline. Another table offers lentil cakes with coriander and vinegar. You accept. It's like hummus that got lost on its way to a dinner party. But it's warm, filling, and undeniably Roman. There's an honesty in these simple dishes, a reminder that for all the lavish feasts, most people were just trying to make it through the day without starving or being conscripted. Toward the far end of the market, you stumble into a spice stall. The scent hits you like a chariot pepper. Cumin, fennel, asafoetida. Spices were expensive but essential for showing off. Even one pinch of imported peppercorn could elevate your boiled cabbage from punishment to cuisine. You sniff a blend meant for stews and immediately sneeze yourself into next week. The merchant laughs and gives you a sample mix of herbs to take with you, his hangover recovery stew pack. He calls it. You nod. You'll need it. Food stalls double as information hubs. A man selling honey cakes tells you the emperor's cousin is building a new bathhouse. A garum vendor insists there's going to be a grain shortage again. A fruit seller claims she saw a senator buying cheap cheese and thinks he's going broke. Everyone has something to say. And most of it involves either food or someone else's poor choices. It's like Twitter. But with better figs. You end the market trip with a small clay cup of warm mulsum wine sweetened with honey and herbs. It's calming, floral, with a slow burning depth. A perfect Roman nightcap. You sip it under a fig tree, while watching two kids chase each other with stolen radishes. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks at a goat wearing a garland. You don't ask why. And just like that, you feel it again. The quiet rhythm beneath the chaos. Rome may be crowded, loud, and obsessed with fermented condiments. But it's alive. Every stall, every pot of lentils, every oily olive or whisper of spice tells a story. Of trade, of labor, of taste evolving not for luxury, but survival and community. The market begins to close. Torches flicker to life. The chatter softens into the lull of evening. You walk home through narrow alleys. Cradling your spice pouch and half a loaf of fig-studded bread, your stomach's full. Your mind swirling with cumin and gossip. And your sandals are sticking again. It's been a good day in the Roman marketplace. Tomorrow, you'll try not to eat mouse again. You wake groggy, still tasting peppered eel and honeyed wine. Your stomach growls. But you know better now than to trust that instinct blindly. Rome has taught you that hunger is a gamble. You might get lentils and barley, or you might get flambéed duck beak. Still, curiosity outweighs caution. So you set off toward the Palatine Hill, where rumor has it, the rich are throwing a morning banquet that will outdo even last year's flaming turtle display. Yes, that happened. As you pass marble columns and perfectly trimmed hedges, a servant in embroidered sandals ushers you into a garden that smells like crushed mint and smugness. You take a seat on a velvet couch, and before you can protest, your cup is filled with a sparkling white wine chilled in snow imported from the Apennines. The man next to you is draped in silk and wearing a gold laurel wreath at breakfast. You ask him his name. He just whispers, "Money." The first dish is served on a tray made of polished onyx. It's aphrodisiac oysters, soaked in vinegar and saffron, resting on a bed of edible roses. They wiggle slightly. You wiggle slightly. The texture is somewhere between silk and panic. Romans believed oysters could invigorate the body and, let's just say, steer passion. Historians still argue whether it actually worked, or if the Romans were just really good at lying to themselves after drinking wine at sunrise. A flute player starts performing behind you. A waiter lights something in the center of the table. It's a roasted ostrich. Not the whole bird, just its neck. Elegantly curved and glazed with honey and black pepper. You're told it was hunted in Numidia and took 5 days to transport. The meat is tender, faintly gamey, and absurdly excessive. You nibble respectfully and wonder if this is what decadence tastes like. The man beside you downs an entire fig stuffed with pine nuts and says he misses the days when peacocks were still shocking. Then come the larks. Tiny birds, deboned and reassembled with almond paste and soaked raisins inside. They arrive on miniature bronze chariots, pulled by roasted carrots. You're not sure if you're supposed to eat the bird, the chariot, or both. You try anyway. The flavors burst with honey, thyme, and social insecurity. A woman across the table lifts a silver bowl and uncovers a stew made from boiled flamingo tongues. They shimmer pink under the candlelight like expensive gilt. Apparently, tongues were prized for their tenderness and unique texture. You try one. It feels like silk, dipped in regret. Not bad. Just unsettling. The same woman then adds a dollop of pureed sea urchin and says it helps the digestion. You thank her through your nose. And then comes the soup, served in a shallow dish shaped like a dolphin. It's a gold leaf brothius. Actual gold flakes, floating on a beef consommé, seasoned with myrrh and frankincense. You slurp gently. It tastes like if a jewelry shop took a bath in bouillon. It's the kind of thing you eat once, and then write an epic poem about your medical bill. You're beginning to lose track of what's food and what's performance. The waiter pours you another cup of spiced wine. And somewhere between sips, a troupe of dancers enters, each balancing a silver plate on their head. The plates contain tiny roasted dormice stuffed with hazelnuts, honey, and pepper, a delicacy for the upper class. They're served with little sprigs of rosemary tucked under their paws. You hesitate. Then remember you've already eaten a mouse reenactment of the founding of Rome. You bite. It's surprisingly tender and sweet. The skin crackles like a delicate pastry, and the filling melts into a savory, nutty cloud. A man in purple leans over and whispers that Emperor Nero once paid a fortune to import a fish from the Black Sea just to serve it in a sauce dyed blue. You ask if he's joking. He stares into his wine like it owes him money. The final course arrives with fanfare. Literally. Slaves wave feathered fans as a platter of boiled parrot eggs is revealed. They're dyed with beets, sprinkled with powdered silphiumyze, the almost mythical extinct herb that Romans once considered a miracle flavorand, placed atop a roasted swan neck. You blink. You chew. You survive. The dining host, a man who hasn't stopped stroking his beard for 2 hours, offers you a digestive, a blend of fermented honey, black pepper, mint, and what might be aged vinegar or possibly floor cleaner. You drink it because you've given up. It's oddly refreshing, like drinking a philosophical argument. Throughout the meal, people talk about investments, poetry, and which senator cried last week during a garum tasting. A man with ink-stained fingers swears by snail slime facials. Another brags about feeding his pet monkey only saffron cakes. You realize food here isn't just nourishment. It's theater, identity, a Roman flex disguised as hospitality. As the banquet ends, the guests recline deeper, full and languid. You excuse yourself and exit slowly, pockets full of fig seeds and your dignity leaking from your sandals. Outside, the evening air hits you like a blessing. No gold, no flamingos, just the smell of street food and smoke from hearths burning lentils into something edible. You pass a group of children gnawing on grilled onions and chestnuts. One offers you a bite. You take it. It's charred, sweet, humble, and suddenly more satisfying than all the powdered parrot eggs in the world. You shuffle down a side street. The scent of cinnamon and singed bird tongue still clinging to your tunic. You're not sure what time it is, but the city is dimming, torches flickering alive, the hum of dinner winding down. That's when you smell it sharp, smoky, and utterly alive. Meat, heavily seasoned, sizzling over coals. Your feet follow instinct. You've stumbled into the heart of the street food world, the sausage stall. The sign above you says Botularius, and the man behind the cart has arms like cured hams and a beard thick enough to trap peppercorns. Hanging behind him are dozens of coiled, glistening sausages, some pale and soft, others dry and red, stiff as scrolls. He offers you a freshly grilled link and calls it Lucanian sausage. You've heard of these before, infamous in the empire. Spicy, greasy, and absolutely not safe to eat while wearing white linen. You bite. The casing snaps. The meat inside is peppery, garlicky, rich with pine nuts, and so fatty it nearly escapes your grip. It's perfect. Smoky from the fire, pungent from the garlic, and so juicy it demands a second napkin and a sense of surrender. Lucanian sausages were originally from the south of Italy, and they were so beloved they became a staple across the empire, from villas to barracks. Some say they were even spiked with silphium. When it was still around, though, that could be sausage marketing. A small crowd gathers. Soldiers, bakers, even a priest in a hurry. They order links wrapped in cabbage leaves, split open into flatbread, dipped in mustard or just eaten straight off the skewer. Sausages, unlike most Roman food, are equal opportunity, portable, punchy, unapologetically greasy. You spot one man dipping his into a little cup of vinegar and honey, Another smears his with crushed dates and cumin. You try both. You can no longer feel your tongue. But you're happy. Historians still argue whether Lukinikai sausages were considered peasant food or street indulgence. Some sources describe them as party staples. Others say they were sold in taverns, known for attracting drunk poets and loud dice games. One inscription mentions sausage, theft apparently a capital crime, if it involved the governor's plate. Honestly, after one bite, you get it. The man behind the stall pulls out a different link, this one darker, smaller, and smells faintly of liver and regret. Try this, he says with pride. Blood sausage, mixed with barley, coriander, fennel. You nod. Because no part of you has self-control anymore. It's earthier, more metallic, and thick with the taste of iron and comfort. A bite of this would wake up a sleeping senator. Maybe literally. You hear tales while you chew. One customer claims he saw Emperor Caracalla down 5 sausages before a battle. Another says Nero banned them for a week and nearly caused riots. A grumpy fish seller insists the best ones were always made by former legionaries, who had nothing left to fight but the sausage fire. It's a snack wrapped in mythology. And possibly pig intestine. You ask how it's made. The vendor lifts a casing yes. Actual intestine. Cleaned and soaked and demonstrates how the spiced meat is piped in. Then twisted, dried, and finally grilled. It's more art than craft. Every region has a variation. Some use goat. Others, beef. Some mix in dried apricots or mint or even pine resin. The rich preferred sausages, cured and hung with bay leaves. The poor ate them fresh, sometimes with boiled cabbage or onions. Nearby, a tavern opens its doors and the scent of sizzling meat wafts out. Sausage is the heart of Rome's tavern food. Cheap, filling, and hard to mess up, unless you burn the casing, in which case, expect a broken amphora over the head. You peek inside and see sausages swimming in lentil stew, skewered between artichoke hearts, sliced cold on clay platters with olive tapenade. One server brings out a sausage rolled in crushed peppercorn and dried cheese. You're not sure if you should bite it or write it a poem. It's easy to romanticize the exotic dishes of the Elida parrot eggs, dormouse peas, but this, right here, is Roman food at its realest. Street food, tavern food, the kind you eat with your hands while arguing about gladiators or avoiding a tax collector, the kind that leaves your fingers sticky and your mind satisfied. You don't need a mosaic floor or a reclining couch. You need fire, fat, and salt. As the night deepens, the sausage stall keeps sizzling. A dog waits, hopefully. A child steals a casing and runs. Laughing, the vendor yells but doesn't chase. This is normal. This is Rome. The kind of city where even food has personality. Drama. And maybe a touch of scandal. You leave with your stomach full, and your robe smelling like garlic and smoke. You walk past a senator's villa and wonder if he's ever had a sausage that wasn't plated in silver. You hope not. Let him miss out. Let the real meals belong to the streets. To the tired. To the hungry. To the ones who eat with both hands and laugh between bites. You wake to the rhythmic clatter of wooden wheels on stone and the gentle braying of donkeys dragging carts loaded with amphorae. Wine deliveries. It's barely sunrise, and the wine's already flowing because in Rome, water might keep you alive. But wine? Wine makes being alive feel slightly less like a punishment. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and follow the scent of boiled grape, must toward the Taberna Veneria Rome's version of your neighborhood wine bar, minus the jazz trio. Inside the dim, tile-floored shop, a man with purple-stained hands is decanting wine from a tall clay jug into smaller vessels. The room smells like oak, vinegar, herbs, and ambition. You're handed a cup before you ask. No greetings here, just assumptions. The wine is red, strong, and slightly sour, default Roman vintage. You sip, cough once, then nod like, it's fine. It's not, but your pride has tasted worse. Romans loved wine so much, they wrote poems about it, taxed it, drowned enemies in it, and dedicated festivals to it. Dionysus had groupies. Bacchus had parties that ended with arrests. Everyone drank men. Women, slaves, emperors, gladiators. It was diluted with water for daily use, unless you were a degenerate, and sometimes thickened with honey or spiced with peppercorns, saffron, Avonmere. Historians still argue whether these additions were culinary innovations or desperate attempts to disguise rot. Your host offers you mulsum, a honeyed wine, served, chilled. This one's smoother, floral, and has less of a tang of despair than the earlier pour. Romans served mulsum at the start of banquets to open the appetite. You take another sip and feel your stomach perk up, as if asking, "So, what are we eating?" Turns out, it's cheese. Someone drops a wooden plate in front of you, slices of sharp pecorino, blobs of fresh curd, a smoked cheese wrapped in fig leaves, and a mysterious hard chunk that might be aged for several decades or dropped from a wall. Cheese was an essential part of the Roman diet, particularly for soldiers and the rural poor. Rich folk liked it too, especially when paired with fruit or baked into honey pies. You sample the smoked one first. It's earthy, intense, and clings to your tongue like a leather sandal. Then the curd, creamy, tangy, and blessedly soft. You could write a letter home about it if you weren't still recovering from last night's Flamingo tongue trauma. The vendor leans over and offers you a bowl of warm cheese, fritters globuli, made of flour, cheese, and eggs, fried and drenched in honey. Dessert cheese. You pop one into your mouth and nearly propose marriage to the nearest amphora. It's crispy outside, molten within, and sticky enough to seal a papyrus scroll shut. A nearby drinker swirls his wine with a sprig of thyme and tells you about sap-reduced grape must use to sweeten wine and food alike. It's like Roman simple syrup. If your idea of simple includes boiling grape juice for 6 hours while cursing Jupiter, you're handed a spoonful and taste syrupy molasses laced with firewood and history. Romans used it in everything: stews, cakes, and occasionally as medicine. You'd put it on pancakes if you had any left from the last gladiator breakfast. Then come the olives. Black, green, cracked, wrinkled, stuffed with herbs, soaked in oil, marinated in vinegar. You try, each like you're judging a culinary pageant. One tastes like salt and sunlight. Another like leather and smugness. A third one might just be a rock. Olives were everywhere in Rome's snacks. Oils. Offerings to gods. One senator supposedly refused to eat anything not cooked in his family's olive oil and was booed at a dinner party for it. Good. A man nearby is spreading olive paste onto barley crackers. He offers you one. You accept. It's rich, oily, briny, with a kick of garlic. Simple, strong, deeply Roman. You ask him where the olives came from. He gestures vaguely toward a hillside and mutters, "Where the sun hurts." Sounds about right. The wine keeps flowing. You're now on your third cup, this time diluted with rosewater. It's dangerously easy to drink. A street performer stumbles in, plays a tune on a reed flute, then asks for payment in cheese. He gets it. No questions asked. That's the kind of economy you respect. Outside, the morning market heats up. The taberna venaria empties, and you step into the light. Buzzed, bloated, and a little wiser about fermented fruit. Romans didn't just drink wine, they structured society around it. The wine served in public versus private. The kind of jug it came from. The dilution ratio. Who poured it for you? One drop could say, "Welcome." Another, "Know your place." And you pass a fountain where a man is soaking old bread in watered wine to soften it into a crude breakfast pudding. Another mixes wine with crushed berries and herbs for his sick mother. A priest drizzles a few drops onto an altar flame. Even the dregs have purpose. Later, in the shadow of the forum, if you sit beside a traveling merchant who offers you candied almonds, dipped in reduced wine syrup, you chew slowly, the sweetness sticking to your teeth. You've had oysters laced with perfume, sausage sold by shouting ex-legionaries, and bread containing trace amounts of volcano. But nothing has kept your attention quite like the endless, boozy undercurrent of Roman life. As the sun climbs higher, you wipe your mouth with your sleeve and stretch your legs. You've tasted wine, old and new, honeyed and bitter, served in golden goblets and clay mugs. You've nibbled cheeses that could raise armies and olives that could end friendships. And as your fourth cup gently kicks your knees out from under you, you realize one thing. Romans didn't eat to live, or live to eat. They feasted to define themselves. By midday, the sun blazes down hard enough to roast an egg on a marble pillar. And honestly, someone probably has. Rome is buzzing, sweating, and layered in a thick stew of heat, gossip, and boiling lentils. You drift toward the Aventine, following your nose through back alleys that smell like a spice drawer had a nervous breakdown. The air gets thicker. The scents grow stranger. Someone's cooking cabbage and, not in a subtle way. No. This cabbage means business. A thin old woman stands over a bubbling pot, humming to herself while ladling out bowls of pultesa thick porridge made of grains and vegetables. She notices you hovering and gestures to a cracked stool. You sit. She ladles. Your spoon sinks into a mix of barley, mashed leeks, cabbage, and a mysterious brown paste. You brace yourself. Then taste. It's Not terrible. Comforting. Even. A savory porridge that whispers, "Hey, I may look like prison food, but I'll keep you alive through 2 invasions and a plumbing strike." Oh, this is pulse, the cornerstone of the Roman working-class diet. Everyone from farmers to legionaries shoveled this into their mouths daily. Think of it as the Roman answer to oatmeal, only with more garlic and less hope. Add in a bit of olive oil or some leftover vegetables, and it was a full meal. If you were lucky, you might get a smattering of garum for flavor, or a handful of chopped nuts to impress your neighbor. It was humble, it was hearty, and it was absolutely everywhere. Some versions included legumes, lentils, chickpeas, fava beans. The Roman poor were nothing if not resourceful. One merchant swore by lentil porridge with bay leaves and vinegar. Another mixed in mustard seeds and dried apple. Historians still argue whether pulses were eaten purely out of necessity or enjoyed for their earthy flavor. You think it's both? With enough seasoning and low expectations? Anything's possible. A young girl passes by with a clay bowl filled with greenish mush. You ask what it is. She says it's boiled chickpeas mashed with garlic and coriander. You try a spoonful. It's like hummus on a dare. Rougher. Sharper. More aggressive, but undeniably filling. Chickpeas were a cheap protein, often boiled with onions, or baked into patties and served with sour wine. Not flashy, but effective. Then there's cabbage. Oh, cabbage. The Romans loved this humble, slightly stinky vegetable more than seems reasonable. Stewed, boiled, grilled, or stuffed. Cabbage was seen as both food and medicine. One senator famously claimed that cabbage prevented every known disease and encouraged his dinner guests to eat it raw with vinegar. You try it. It crunches with alarming confidence. The flavor is bracing, bitter, and vaguely threatening. You reach for your wine cup and try not to cry. A nearby stew pot reveals yet another staple, marietum. A garlicky cheese spread pounded with herbs and oil into a pungent paste. You spread it on a scrap of barley bread. Your nose recoils. Your taste buds riot. But once the burn fades, it's oddly addictive. Rustic. Sharp. Packed with green flavor. This is peasant pesto, and it doesn't apologize. The old woman watches you work through the bowl and nods approvingly. She offers you a dried fig and a smile with 2 teeth. You accept both. Her husband joins you, dropping a hot turnip cake onto the table. It's crispy on the edges, soft inside, spiced with cumin and salt. You eat it too quickly and burn your tongue. Worth it. The couple explains how they stretch food through the week. Monday is lentils. Tuesday, cabbage. Wednesday, turnips. Thursday, porridge again. Friday, boiled fish heads. Saturday, baked apples with leftover nuts. And Sunday is whatever didn't rot. It's not glamorous, but it's survival. And in Rome, that's a respectable achievement. They tell you about community ovens, neighborhood kilns, where poor families bring dough or vegetables to bake. It saves fuel and builds routine. While their turnip stew bubbles, neighbors swap bread, herbs, rumors. It's food as currency, food as connection. There's a rhythm here that doesn't need silver platters or flamingo parts. just heat, patience, and shared hunger. You nibble on pickled onions. A boy offers you boiled millet seasoned with fish sauce and lemon rind. You pass by a woman selling roasted carrots glazed with honey and crushed coriander. Everything is honest, coarse, and rooted in the land. You're not here for pleasure. You're here to get through another day without passing out in a toga. Still, there's creativity. A tavern down the road makes vegetable pies with fennel, leeks, and stale bread soaked in wine. Another serves broad bean mash fried into rough patties with beetroot. One vendor scoops up something that looks suspiciously like mashed garlic, onion, and cheese melted together into a bubbling spread. You take a bite. You don't ask questions. You eat. As evening falls, the humble porridge stall closes. You thank the couple with a polite bow. Now, armed with the knowledge that survival doesn't have to taste like punishment. It can taste like lentils, or turnips, or chickpeas, pretending to be gourmet. And somehow, that's enough. Walking away, you realize you've just experienced the true Roman diet, not the elite's edible parade floats or the senator's flaming swan pie, but the daily food that fueled builders, foot soldiers, mothers, and poets alike. They didn't eat to impress. They ate to last, and they did. You're still licking garlic from your fingers when a thunderous rumble shakes the dusty stone under your sandals. Not an earthquake, just the stomachs of 24 gladiators marching toward their next meal. You follow at a distance, drawn by the sound of leather creaking, swords clinking, and at least one man singing a very inappropriate song about cabbage. The trail leads you to the Ludus, the gladiator training school, where the food is simple, brutal, and designed to keep you alive long enough to be stabbed in front of an audience. Inside the courtyard, giant clay kettles bubble with thick gruel. Steam rises, carrying with it the smell of barley, beans, and desperation. The cook bald, angry, and probably a former executioner shoves a bowl into your hands before you can ask what's inside. You look down. It's beige. It's chunky. It smells like a sweaty handshake. This is sagina, the gladiator's staple, a dense, protein-packed porridge made from barley, legumes, and the occasional handful of bitter greens. You take a spoonful. It's chewy, earthy, and tastes like endurance. Historians still argue whether this plain diet was designed for bulk or punishment. Gladiators were nicknamed barley men. For good reason. Their bodies were built not on meat and wine, but on cheap grains, lentils, and intense training. Protein wasn't necessarily scarce, but it wasn't from chicken legs and steaks. It came from chickpeas, beans, nuts, and the ever-present fava bean, that noble little legume that built empires and bloated entire armies. A grizzled veteran sits beside you and cracks open a jar of fermented fish sauce garum. Of course, drizzle over his gruel. You flinch. He winks. The addition makes the flavor saltier and more energetic. It's a kick in the taste buds. And for men who get stabbed for sport, that's exactly what's needed. Occasionally, they're fed meat, usually cheap cuts like liver, tripe, or blood sausage, not for luxury, but for iron You get offered a slab of boiled ox liver, lightly seasoned and served with sour wine. It's gritty, pungent, and almost insultingly nutritious. One trainer claims it helps make the blood stick better. You don't ask questions. You chew. Nearby, a cook prepares roasted beets, believed to purify the blood and improve stamina. You try one. It's sweet, earthy, and oddly soothing. After all the oily sausage and fishy honey wine, this feels like a vegetable that just wants what's best for you. Other sides include vinegar-soaked onions, mashed lentils, and hard biscuits dunked in Posca vinegar water, popular among both soldiers and gladiators. Posca tastes like lemony regret, but it hydrates and keeps scurvy at bay. So bottoms up, there's no silk, no silver, no dancers here, just clay bowls, wooden spoons, sweat, and an eerie sense of discipline. Food isn't about pleasure here. It's about performance. The body is a weapon, and every meal is ammunition. The men eat in silence, then break into friendly brawls. One lifts a whole amphora as a joke. Another sharpens a spoon, like it's a dagger. A third naps sitting up, chewing a fig. You're invited to help stir one of the kettles. The barley porridge resists. It bubbles like lava and smells faintly of old boots. You add a pinch of cumin and dried mint, trying to contribute something edible. A passing fighter grunts approvingly. Encouraged, you sprinkle in crushed garlic and a few walnuts from your pouch. It helps. A little. The cook snorts, but doesn't stop you. You may have just invented Rome's first artisanal gruel. Later, someone tosses you a cup of goat's milk and a heel of stale bread. You soak the bread and chew slowly. It's not luxury, but it fills the corners of your stomach that porridge couldn't reach. Someone passes around dried fruit figs and dates mostly high in sugar, good for quick energy. They also help distract from the looming threat of being skewered tomorrow afternoon. A young trainee asks if you want to see the supply room. Of course you do. Inside, shelves line the walls with sacks of lentils, cracked barley, dried herbs, and amphorae of oil, jars of olives, onions, and even the occasional dried cheese round out the rations. Everything has a purpose. Nothing is wasted. This isn't the kitchen of an emperor, it's the pantry of warriors. Focused, unpretentious, and built to keep you breathing. He points to a small box in the corner. It's full of charred bones and ash. For the ashes, he says. You blink. Gladiators were given ash to eat, not as punishment, but as a calcium supplement. Charred bones, crushed and mixed into food, possibly to help heal bruises and strengthen their frames. Historians still debate whether this was widely practiced or just a few weirdos in one camp. But here, it's real, and you're politely offered a sample. You decline, firmly. As the sun begins to set, a final tray is passed around. Honey cakes, dense and slightly burned, but warmly spiced. A small luxury after a day of gruel and grit. You bite in and almost moan. The sweetness softens your jaw. One man sighs and says it reminds him of home. You don't ask where that is. You just nod and take another bite. Before you leave, the head cook slaps a small pouch into your palm-roasted chickpeas. salted, and spiced. Gladiator trail mix. You pocket it. You'll need it for the road. You exit the training school into the cooling night. Your muscles sore from stirring kettles, and your respect for Rome's warriors permanently increased. They weren't powered by glory. They were powered by beans, barley, and a burning refusal to quit. The air cools as twilight stretches over the rooftops, and your path winds past a quiet courtyard where old men sit beneath fig trees, peeling garlic cloves and reminiscing about grain shortages like they were love affairs. You nod at them, feet dragging slightly, stomach still heavy with barley and beetroot. When you catch a flicker of flame and a puff of thick, aromatic smoke, it's coming from a household shrine and, also, coincidentally, from the back porch of a middle-class domus where a private cook is preparing dinner. You edge closer, pretending to admire the garden. What you're really admiring is the grilled cheese. Yes, grilled cheese. Or rather, something like its slices of goat cheese wrapped in grape leaves and grilled over coals, then drizzled with honey and sprinkled with dried thyme. You've wandered into the culinary realm of the plebeian elite, not senators or emperors, but prosperous merchants and officials who can afford flavor, not fireworks. The matron of the house spots you. She doesn't shoo you away. Instead, she hands you a small clay dish and nods. "Try this," she says. "My son swears it cured his stutter." You take a bite. The leaf chars crisply. The cheese oozes. The honey sings. It tastes like melted defiance and quiet luxury. Rich but modest. Enough to make you understand why the middle class never wants to go back to cabbage stew. Inside, the meal is being set. A wooden table. Clean but unadorned. Earthenware bowls of lentils and chickpeas. Platters of seasoned fish, mostly mackerel and sardines grilled, and served with crushed herbs and vinegar. There's a roasted rabbit stuffed with juniper and onions, and a flatbread so fresh it sighs steam when broken. This is Middle Rome, and this is how it eats. Nothing too rare, nothing too outrageous, but everything prepared with a kind of domestic reverence that makes each bite feel intentional. You're seated between two children who are loudly debating whether figs or dates are superior. You're given both. The figs are fresh, their centers sticky and bursting. The dates have been simmered in wine and cinnamon, then dusted with sesame seeds. You eat in silence while your taste buds conduct a tiny Roman opera. The father, a merchant who sells dyed cloth, raises a toast with a cup of diluted wine and says something about good harvests and fewer taxes. The mother responds by serving small portions of lentil cakes fried in oil and topped with crushed garlic and mint. They're soft on the inside, golden on the outside, and perfect for soaking up the last bits of vinegar sauce left on your plate. As you bite into a roasted leek topped with garum and a pinch of mustard seeds, the man across the table chuckles. "Food should taste like memory," he says. "And regret." You ask what he means. He tells you about his childhood, porridge, flatbread, and occasionally dried apples on feast days. Now, with steady income, he can afford fish 3 times a week and oil that doesn't smell like betrayal. The next dish is tripe stomach, lining from a young ox, boiled with fennel, onions, and a splash of wine. It's chewy, rich, and not as alarming as it sounds. The texture requires commitment, but the flavor is bold and strangely soothing. Romans believed offal had medicinal value, strengthening the body and preventing certain illnesses. Historians still argue whether this was science or superstitioner, simply a way of using every part of the animal in a world where waste was weakness. Dessert is simple: honey-glazed almonds and tiny grape tarts, served in baked crusts made of flour and oil. Sweet, heavy, and just complicated enough to feel special. A small boy offers you his last tart. You decline. He insists. You accept. The crust crumbles perfectly. You are now bound by Roman hospitality and a small child's judgment. You sip watered wine from a clay cup, and it's been steeped with rosemary and bay. Refreshing, herbal, with just enough bitterness to keep you alert. Someone offers a pickled fig. You eat it without hesitation. It's sweet and sour, tangy and wild. You wonder how many meals in your modern life could be improved by starting with grilled cheese and ending with a fermented fruit surprise. The family's slave, a young man with kind eyes, sets down a bowl of barley cooked with dried pears and crushed nuts. It's like porridge decided to go on vacation. Warm, subtly sweet, layered with texture and comfort. You thank him, and he nods, clearly proud. He mentions the recipe is his own, something he learned from his grandmother, who cooked for a senator but preferred shepherd's food. You realize that in this house, food isn't just about wealth or tradition. It's about craft, balance, a quiet kind of artistry that doesn't need applause. Just empty bowls. The flavors are nuanced, deliberate. Even the olives come in two styles: marinated in garlic oil, or dusted with crushed coriander and orange zest. You try both. You regret nothing as dusk slips into night. A final dish is passed around: pear slices simmered in wine and pepper. Soft, spiced, and as unexpected as the hospitality that brought you here. Someone lights a lantern. Someone else begins humming a lullaby. You let your belly stretch and your shoulders soften. This isn't excess. It isn't survival. It's something in between. A space where comfort lives, where food carries memory, but also imagination. You've eaten with the elite and the poor, the warriors and the workers. But here, in a modest courtyard, beneath fig trees and fading sunlight, you feel something rare, full and quietly, deeply content. Your belly still pleasantly full. You wander out into the night air, where torches flicker along the roads and the hum of late-night commerce echoes between stuccoed walls. You catch the faint scent of something fried again, and like a moth to flame, you drift toward the source. It's a vendor with a portable brazier, sizzling with something that sounds like 100 tiny screams. You peer in. It's tiny fish, whole, heads and all, being fried until crisp enough to shatter like pottery. The vendor, whose teeth are as gold as his tunic is greasy, hands you a waxed paper cone of them with a shrug. You bite in, crunching through skull, spine, and tail, and are surprised by the briny kick and sudden burst of oil. These are opii, or whitebait, the tiny silverfish that filled the Tiber by the thousands and made their way onto street corners like this. Cheap, plentiful, and easy to prepare and no gutting needed. Just salt, oil, and a brazier hot enough to singe your eyebrows. You chase them with a gulp of watered wine and try not to think about the eyes. These weren't the delicacies of the rich or the staples of the poor. They were Roman fast food. The sort you grab on the way to a chariot race, or after one too many amphorae of mulsum. You watch a passing mason toss back a handful like popcorn, not even chewing. Meanwhile, a boy steals a cone when the vendor's back is turned and disappears into the dark. The vendor sighs, but doesn't chase him. It's all part of the economy. A few stalls down, another vendor is stirring a pot of what looks like dark, bubbling sludge. You inch closer. He sees your face and grins. "Snail stew," he says. "Proud as a poet. Caught fresh this morning." You hesitate. He raises a ladle. You accept. The stew is rich, heavy with garlic, leeks, and a smoky, almost earthy aroma. You brace for slime, but instead find the snails firm, tender, and surprisingly meaty. Romans raised snails in dedicated gardens, feeding them milk and wine to fatten them up, gourmet gastropods, if you will. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. The texture is oddly satisfying, like calamari with a law degree. Snails weren't always street food. They had been luxury once, even appearing in elite banquets. But over time, they became affordable indulgences for those who wanted to feel fancy without sacrificing rent. Historians still argue whether snail farming was widespread or mostly confined to high-end villa gardens. But either way, you're impressed and slightly uncomfortable. Next comes roasted dormouse. No. Really. You turn a corner, and there it is, turning on a spit like it's just another piece of poultry. It's been skinned, seasoned with honey and poppy seeds, and stuffed with a paste of nuts and herbs. You hesitate. Then you remember what you've already eaten this week and shrug. The vendor slices off a portion. You chew. It's sweet, nut, and weirdly good, like a miniature squirrel crossed with baklava. Romans served dormice as status symbols, often inside intricate pastry cages or doused in exotic spices. Here, it's simpler, but still oddly elegant. Nearby, a girl is selling skewers of roasted mushrooms and onions drizzled with wine reduction. You try one. The mushrooms are chewy and earthy, the onions blistered and sweet. It's the closest thing to modern street food you've tasted all day. Simple, rich in umami, and ready to be eaten with one hand. She wraps it in a leaf and hands it over. You give her a coin and a grateful nod. The scent of baked dough draws you next to a man rolling out flatbreads on a stone slab, topping them with herbs, cheese, and sometimes bits of anchovy or olive. Not quite pizza boot hauntingly close. You take one with soft cheese and basil. The crust is chewy, the top salty and fragrant. You inhale it in 4 bites and immediately consider seconds. The Romans didn't invent pizza, but this was clearly the prequel. Farther down the lane, a woman is frying chickpea batter into discs the size of your palm, then dusting them with cumin and salt. They're crispy on the outside, soft inside, and satisfyingly savory like the rebellious cousin of falafel. She calls them libum, though that term also refers to cheese bread offerings to the gods. You wonder if the gods might prefer chickpeas. You know you would. Another stall boasts dried fruit states. Figs, even thin slices of pear cured in wine and sun-dried into chewy, sticky sheets. You chew one as you stroll. It's rich and concentrated, like the entire orchard distilled into a single bite. A man hands you a date stuffed with almonds and dipped in honey, and you can't help but close your eyes. You've eaten so much, your tunic might burst. But this feels like a hug from Venus herself. As midnight nears, the street begins to quiet. Vendors pack up. The scent of smoke and spice lingers in the warm Roman air. You find a stone bench near a shuttered bakery and sit. Reflecting, what started as a walk became a banquet of everything Rome's streets had to offer: fried fish, snail stew, grilled dormouse, herb flatbread, and more chickpea dishes than you knew existed. This wasn't the food of emperors or generals. It was the pulse of the people, unrefined, spontaneous, deeply flavored by necessity and invention. Nothing wasted. Everything used, whether wrapped in leaves, stuffed with nuts, soaked in garum, or kissed by coals. Each bite told a story, not of wealth, but of wit. The kind of creativity born when flavor matters more than formality. You stretch, pat your stomach, and wipe oil from your fingers. You've eaten your way across an empire to night-not, through marble halls or reclining couches, but through alleyways and fire pits, through grizzled cooks and hopeful vendors, through bites big and small that each ask the same question: are you full yet? And you are. Almost. By morning, the smell of ash and fennel still clings faintly to your tunic, and your dreams are a fever dream of dormouse on skewers and garum-drenched everything. You wake with a groan and a stomach that is cautiously optimistic about today's menu. The streets hum earlier than usual. It's market day. You join the flow of sandals and carts, past graffiti-scrawled walls and sleeping dogs, until the forum's edge spills into a riot of food, trade, and bartering voices arguing about the price of fermented radish. You begin where all respectable foodies of antiquity begin, with the bread. A long queue coils in front of a public oven, where hot loaves are pulled from a blackened stone mouth and slapped onto wooden counters faster than you can say carbohydrate. The bread is round, dense, and scored into 8 convenient wedges because sharing is mandatory when there are 12 people in your household and only one loaf. You bite in while it's still steaming. It's coarse, slightly sour, and studded with bits of bran and grit. Literally, Roman flour wasn't sifted like modern kinds, and the grinding stones often chipped off, gifting you the occasional fleck of rock. Dentists in the empire must have made a killing. This bread is panis plebeius, the people's loaf, coarser than the white loaves reserved for wealthier citizens, but good enough to fuel a laborer or soldier through a day of stone hauling or sword waving. The wealthier might get panis siligineus, whiter, softer, and made from refined wheat butt for most. This hearty brick of survival would do just fine. You soak it in some leftover olive oil and vinegar, and it softens into something halfway between comforting and chewy punishment. Next, you stop by a fruit stall. Figs glisten in the sun, their insides exposed like tiny plum-colored lungs. You choose the ripest and bite in. The taste is pure ambrosia, sweet, grainy, sun-drenched, Alongside the figs sit apples, grapes, and small yellow plums. The vendor offers you a slice of dried apple, dipped in cinnamon and reduced wine syrup. You take it. You chew slowly. You plot your return. At the next table, jars of preserved goods glimmer in the light. Pickled onions, fermented turnips, carrots in brine, cabbage swimming in garlic vinegar. Each jar, a tiny time capsule of whatever season is currently betraying the empire. You sample a bit of pickled beet. It tastes like regret and vinegar, with just enough sweetness to let you forgive it. One vendor is grinding mustard seeds with a stone pestle, mixing in garlic, honey, and herbs. He hands you a dollop on a fig leaf. You taste. It punches you in the nose with heat and depth. Like if horseradish went to college. Romans loved mustard and used it to dress everything from vegetables to meats to their own sense of culinary superiority. You pass by a fishmonger with barrels of salted anchovies, sardines, and chunks of preserved tuna belly packed in oil. A boy pulls out a dried eel and waves it like a trophy. The air smells like brine and daring. You keep walking. You're not that hungry yet. Then comes the Spice Man. His stall is a rainbow of tiny ceramic bowls. Black pepper from India, saffron from Spain, cumin from Egypt, and the ever-present Roman obsession silphium, or rather, a local substitute, since true silphium had gone extinct generations earlier due to overuse and an unfortunate lack of farming foresight. Historians still argue whether the plant's legendary flavor justified its extinction, or if the hype was just elite posturing. You take a sniff of the alternative. Known as asafoetida, it smells like garlic met a sulfur mine. But you're assured it tastes better than it smells. You pretend to believe them. A sweet scent catches your attention. Candied nuts. A young woman roasts almonds in honey, stirring constantly so they don't burn. She tosses you a still warm cluster. It sticks to your teeth, your fingers, and possibly your soul. You buy a small pouch. You immediately regret not buying more. As you round a corner, you find a man selling pulse punica, a savory porridge dyed bright red with crushed mulberries and mixed with spices, wine, and bits of meat. You try a spoonful. It's rich, odd, and unexpectedly addictive. A dish from Carthage. Now, Romanized and beloved in certain corners of the city. A food born of conquest. Then shared at breakfast. Another vendor hawks honey cake stents. Palm-sized. Flecked with nuts and rose petals. Sweetened with date syrup and sprinkled with poppy seeds. You chew one slowly while watching a potter haggling over salted cucumbers. The cake is like biting into a love letter from your pancreas. You spot a small crowd gathered around a speaker in the middle of the forum. He's yelling about wheat rations, bad senators, and grain imports from Egypt. The crowd half listens, half eats roasted chickpeas from paper cones. Politics and snacks, always a good pairing. By late morning, your satchel is bulging with vine leaves, dried apples, and a suspicious wedge of goat cheese. Your face is sticky with honey and your fingertips dusted with cumin. You've barely made it through half the market. You stop at a final stall, curious about the row of jugs. Vinegar. You think, but no. Its defrutum grape must reduced by boiling until it becomes a thick, sticky syrup, used in sauces, desserts, even medicine. You dip a fig into it. The flavor is intense, syrupy, and deeply Roman. Sweet. Yes, but with an edge like a memory of wine that never quite fermented. The market begins to thin as the sun climbs higher. Vendors sit, fanning themselves with fig leaves. You find a stone bench shaded by an awning of old linen. Stretch out your legs and nibble a dried pear. You look at the chaos of carts and customers and realize you've eaten your way across the edible map of an empire that couldn't stop conquering or fermenting things. Everything here has traveled, spices across deserts, fish up rivers, cheese through mountain passes. But together, here in the market, they belong. They feed a city that dreams in empire, but eats in alleyways. And you, sticky and full, are a very happy witness. The sun drapes the city in its noonday glare as you drift past the market's edge, following the distant sound of splashing water and the occasional clatter of dropped amphorae. Your sandals click against the mosaic pavement, leading toward a communal bathhausenot for a soak. Not yet, but because, strangely, these steam-slicked social centers are also home to some of the empire's most fascinating snack options. That's right. You're here to investigate the Roman equivalent of the poolside cafe, the bathhouse food stalls. As you round the outer courtyard, you find a small crowd gathered around a vendor balancing his wares on a portable tray, suspended from his neck by 2 ropes. He calls out like a modern-day hot dog vendor at a baseball game. Only instead of peanuts and pretzels, he's offering salted nuts, slices of cheese, hard-boiled eggs, olives soaked in vinegar, and triangular pockets of dough filled with minced vegetables. You buy one of those pockets and bite in. It's warm, flaky, and the filling garlic leaks. Maybe turnifus just enough flavor to distract you from the fact that the dough is a bit undercooked. Still, it's food. And for bathers fresh from a scrub and steam, it's enough to tide them over until dinner. This was a common Roman habit. Bathe, snack, socialize, repeat. For some, the bathhouse meal wasn't even about nutrition. It was about rhythm. Routine, like how you might grab a smoothie after the gym. They craved that sharp little something to match the steamy unwind. You watch a man gnaw on a skewer of roasted garlic bulbs. Another peels a hard-boiled egg and dips it into a dish of cumin salt before popping it whole into his mouth. Crunch. Silence. Satisfied sigh. The snack stall features small earthenware bowls of olives black. Green. Some cracked and marinated in garlic and citrus peel. You sample a few. They're intense, punchy, slightly bitter, and a bit addictive. A vendor next to him is selling fried pastries filled with sweet cheese and drizzled with defrutum. You try one. The pastry crunches softly before giving way to the creamy filling, and your eyes may or may not water a little. The combination of sweet and sour, crisp and soft, it's Roman culinary poetry in edible haiku form. Another tray holds small sausages made from mashed lentils and leeks, wrapped in fig leaves and roasted on coals. They're warm and savory, with an herbal finish that lingers on your tongue. Plant-based protein. Roman style. Historians still argue whether these lentil sausages were a creative invention of the poor or a clever vegetarian adaptation for religious festivals. Either way, they taste better than they sound. Nearby, a young boy darts through the crowd, selling skewers of dried meat salty, chewy strips of goat, possibly cured with herbs and vinegar. You buy one. It's like Roman jerky, tough, flavorful, and strangely energizing. You wonder if this is what kept messengers running from one end of the empire to the other without collapsing mid-scroll. You hear a sharp laugh and turn to see a cluster of women seated on a low bench, sharing a bowl of cold barley salad. It's tossed with chopped cucumbers, mint, and bits of sheep cheese. You're offered a taste. It's refreshing, tart, and almost modern-like, something you might find in a hipster cafe with fake Latin on the menu. But here, it's just lunch. Next to them, someone set up a makeshift grill over a brazier, slow-roasting mushrooms in oil and rosemary. You try one slippery, earthy, delicious, then another, then 3 more. The vendor raises an eyebrow and offers you the last skewer free. You accept, knowing you've now consumed approximately half the edible plant life in the city. As the afternoon stretches on, you notice patterns in the Roman bathhouse snacking philosophy: portable, shareable, bold in flavor, and rooted in whatever was fresh, fermented, or able to survive the heat. No frills. Just food that works, fills, and encourages the telling of increasingly exaggerated stories between mouthfuls. You settle into a corner with a cup of pasca, that diluted vinegar drink favored by soldiers, slaves, and anyone tired of spending a fortune on wine. It's tart, oddly hydrating, and surprisingly pleasant, with a bit of honey mixed in. A man nearby spikes his with crushed rosemary and orange zest, and you steal his idea without shame. Another man unwraps a fig leaf to reveal a dense little cake made from semolina and mashed beans, sweetened with date syrup and baked over coals. He shares it with you. It's grainy, nuttu, a little odd but undeniably satisfying. Romans had an uncanny ability to make the most out of starch and legumes, whether savory or sweet. Beans found their way into almost everything. As the crowds begin to thin and the shadows stretch across the pavement, you reflect on the sheer ingenuity at play here. These weren't rich citizens reclining on silken couches while being fed by servants. These were regular Romans, workers, parents, retired soldiers, students, all carving out their brief moments of culinary pleasure between the marble and the mud. You stand to leave, brushing crumbs from your tunic and wiping your oily fingers on a fig leaf. One last vendor tries to tempt you with candied orange peel dipped in sesame. You say no, then yes, then you buy 2. Walking away from the bathhouse, your bag is a little heavier, your steps a little slower, and your appreciation for Roman snack culture significantly stronger. They didn't need extravagant ingredients to feel indulgent. Just a bit of oil, some herbs, and the will to experiment. You think? Not for the first time. That Roman food isn't so much about recipes, it's about rhythm. Seasoned routines wrapped in grape leaves and drizzled with memories. Your sandals click steadily on sun-warmed stone as you head out of the bustling heart of Rome and toward a quieter district, where the scent of wild rosemary wafts through open windows and olive trees lean lazily over crumbling garden walls. Here, In the shaded courtyards of countryside villas and suburban domus, Romans live life a bit more slowly and eat accordingly. You've seen the street food, the soldiers' rations, the bathhouse snacks. Now, you're about to taste the daily rhythm of the upper middle class, those who don't flaunt gold, but also don't need to steal fish guts from a market stall. As you step through the archway of a well-kept house, the breeze carries hints of bay leaf and something, baking, something distinctly weedy and promising. The matron of the household, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and flour on her nose, waves you in. Lunch is being prepared. You're just in time to chop herbs. You don't argue. In the kitchena, simple but elegant space with a clay oven and marble prep slab, you're handed a bundle of herbs, thyme, savory, mint, oregano, and rue. You begin chopping while taking in the array of ingredients lined up like a parade of potential. Chickpeas soaking in a bowl, a plate of fresh peaches and pears, slices of smoked fish laid carefully over damp cloth, a pot of lentils bubbling gently with bits of onion and celery root. The air smells like anticipation. The main dish today is pulse, a thick porridge made from spelt or farro, but unlike the versions eaten by soldiers and slaves, this one is elevated with garlic, crushed pine nuts, cheese, and fresh herbs. Your herbs, now expertly minced. The cook stirs in olive oil and a bit of honey, turning the paste into something rich and creamy. You dip a spoon in. It tastes nutty, aromatic, and far more comforting than it has any right to be. This is the Roman secret sauce, same base ingredients, wildly different outcomes depending on who's cooking and who's watching. Next comes a side of stewed leeks and lentils, seasoned with coriander and a dash of garum. The leeks are soft, almost buttery, and the lentils collapse in your mouth with a smoky sweetness. You help arrange them in small clay bowls while a servant brings in a tray of Moretama garlicky cheese spread made with herbs, vinegar, and olive oil, smashed together with a mortar and pestle. You scoop some onto a slice of crusty bread. It's tangy, bold, and so pungent it could cure heartbreak or start a war. A boy carries in skewers of grilled lamb, seasoned with mustard and honey. You raise an eyebrow. The cook explains it's for Gesta, cousin from Naples, and his wife. Apparently, not an everyday luxury, but not rare either. Meat wasn't common on every Roman table, but when it did appear, it was used with intention. Grilled, spiced, often stretched with fruits or nuts. The skewers are plated with fig slices and a drizzle of vinegar syrup. You sneak one. It melts between your teeth. You vow eternal loyalty to whoever invented honey mustard lamb. The conversation at the table drifts between politics, household repairs, and whether the pears this season are better than last year. Plates are passed, cups refilled with lightly spiced wine, and laughter flows as easily as olive oil. There's no gluttony here, just steady bites, shared flavors, and an appreciation for ingredients that feel familiar but never boring. You realize this meal isn't just about taste, it's about rhythm, morning prep, midday reward, an edible structure to shape the day. Dessert is modest but perfect. Pear slices baked with poppy seeds, drizzled with defrutum and sprinkled with toasted barley. A fig and almond cake is sliced into thin wedges and offered with small cups of herb-steeped wine. You take one piece, then another. The texture is dense and moist, the flavor deep and sweet, with just a whisper of bitterness from the wine reduction. After lunch, a basket of leftovers is handed to a household worker to distribute to a nearby family. It's a good meal, the matron says, and better shared. You nod, trying not to look like you're about to cry over chickpeas and generosity. You help clear dishes and are rewarded with one final treat, a cold barley salad made with cucumbers, mint, and lemon vinegar, a cleansing end to a hearty meal. You sip cool water from a terracotta cup and breathe in the mingled scents of garlic, bread, and ripening fruit. You feel nourished in a way that transcends hunger as you step back out into the warm light of afternoon. The clatter of the kitchen fades behind you. The flavors linger. So do the conversations. In this villa, food is time itself. It's how the day is divided, how relationships are measured, and how love is both expressed and consumed. No flashy ingredients, no golden forks, just beans, herbs, and the patient hands that make them taste like luxury. You follow the winding stone road away from the suburban villas and toward the rolling countryside beyond Rome's city walls. The noise quiets. The air softens. Olive groves stretch lazily across hillsides, and wheat fields shimmer golden beneath a sleepy sun. A shepherd passes you with a crooked smile and a bag slung over one shoulder. He nods, offering a fig from his lunch, and you accept it like a sacred relic. It's soft, sun-warmed, and impossibly sweet. This is where food becomes humble again, where it's grown, raised, and eaten all within a few dusty miles. You pass a small cluster of home-modest stone cottages with thatched roofs and gardens brimming with beans, onions, and herbs. Chickens wander freely. A goat bleats somewhere behind a fig tree. You're waved inside by a farm wife, with arms like tree branches and a face lined by laughter and sun. She gestures to a bench by the hearth and begins pulling things from a low shelf, a bowl of cracked barley, a few small onions, adriatsosage, and a hunk of cheese that smells like it's been aging since Romulus. Lunch here is whatever you can make from whatever you have. Today, that means barley stew thickened with goat milk, onion, and scraps of dried pork. She stirs the pot with practiced ease, adding a pinch of mint and a splash of vinegar from a clay jug. She calls her secret weapon. The smell is smoky, savory, and grounding. You chew on a piece of flatbread while you wait. It's hard as stone, but warmed over the fire. It softens into something resembling edible resilience. While the stew simmers, she shows you her pantry really. Just a shelf in the wall, packed with preserved plums, pickled garlic, salted beans, and clay-stoppered jars of sheep's cheese submerged in olive oil. No abundance, just preparedness. Romans in the countryside understood how to stretch every harvest, pickle every spare root, dry every excess leaf. Nothing wasted, not a single lentil. The stew is served with a spoon carved from olive wood. You take a bite. It's thick, rich, and surprisingly luxurious, considering the ingredients. The dried sausage rehydrates just enough to offer chew and flavor. The mint dances in the vinegar's acidity. You reach for another spoonful before finishing the first. She watches with satisfaction. You're handed a chunk of that ancient cheese and a few pickled onions on the side. The cheese is firm, salty, almost nutty. The onions are sharp and bright. Together, they wake up every inch of your tongue. Then comes a bowl of mashed beans fava, creamy and drizzled with oil topped with chopped herbs and crushed coriander. You scoop it up with torn bread and feel something close to spiritual revelation. The farmwife tells you stories while you eat, about how her father taught her to ferment turnips in wine, or how her grandmother would grind chickpeas with her feet to soften them before boiling. You're not sure if that last one is true or a countryside exaggeration, but either way, it makes the mashed beans more memorable. Dessert is a handful of walnuts and a single peach, still warm from the sun. She cracks the shells with a rock and hands them over, and you suck the peach juice from your fingers like it's the last sweet thing on earth. Romans didn't always separate sweet from savory. They understood that good food was about layers, not categories. A single walnut could finish a meal, the same way honeyed cake could if it was eaten slowly, gratefully, and without apology. Before you leave, she wraps a wedge of cheese in fig leaves and hands it to you with a look that says, "Don't let it melt before you reach home." You nod solemnly, tucking it carefully into your satchel. You step back into the afternoon, blinking in the light, heart oddly full. You've eaten with senators and street hawkers, but this humble barley stew and pickled pantry magic feels the most Roman of all. Further down the path, you pass a vineyard where workers are laying grapes on drying racks to make passum, a concentrated sweet wine made by fermenting sun-dried fruit. You're handed a cup. It's thick, dark, and tastes like syrup and sunlight. It lingers on your tongue like memory. As the countryside unfolds in golden ribbons, you realize that in the Roman world, food isn't just sustenance, its survival is ritual. It's legacy and flavor. The rich might feast. The poor might scavenge. But here in the middle on these farms and under these olive trees, people feed themselves with patience and intention. They grow what they eat. They remember every season, and they season every memory with oil and laughter. You find a stone wall and sit a while, unwrapping the cheese again, just to look at it. It smells like smoke and old stories. You nibble a corner. It crumbles slightly, just enough to dust your fingers. Somewhere nearby, someone is roasting garlic over coals. The breeze carries the scent your way, and your stomach, somehow, dares to growl again. The road curves gently downhill now, and as your sandals crunch over the dusty path, the hum of the countryside gives way to the low din of clustered voices, the rhythmic beat of hand tools, and the braying of donkeys. You're entering a village on the edge of a latifundiumone of those massive agricultural estates that feed both the appetites and egos of Roman senators and nobles back in the capital. But while the owners lounge in shaded courtyards discussing poetry over pomegranate wine, it's the laborers. Hear the tenant farmers, the enslaved workers, the seasonal helpers who are out in the fields at dawn, stomachs growling, hands in dirt. You pass a row of stone cottages, low-roofed and soot-streaked, where a group of field hands huddle over their midday meal. You're waved over and handed a piece of barley bread, thick as your palm and twice as dense. It's dipped in olive oil, sprinkled with salt, and eaten with fingers stained from pruning grapevines. The bread is sour and fibrous, a proper jaw workout, but dunked in a bowl of vinegary lentil stew. It softens enough to swallow without injury. The lentil stew is the real hero here. Boiled with garlic, carrots, celery, and a few precious flakes of dried pork fat. It simmers all morning on a cracked hearthstone while the workers pluck olives and harvest wheat. Some throw in foraged greens or old wine to add flavor. Others swear by the addition of fig syrup. Historians still argue whether these stews reflect culinary ingenuity or desperate improvisation, but regardless, the result is hearty, tangy, and surprisingly satisfying for a one-pot miracle cooked under economic duress. One man grins and hands you a square of something wrapped in fig leaf. It's a slice of satura, a crumbly cake made from barley flour, mashed dates, and goat cheese, sweetened with just enough honey to make you blink in surprise. You chew slowly. It's grainy, sweet, earth-eyed, kind of dessert you can eat while still holding a hoe in one hand. Roman workers didn't have time for delicate pastries. They had time for dense, portable calories that could double as both food and blunt instrument. Someone else offers you pickled garlic cloves stored in an old olive jar. They're pungent, sharp enough to strip paint, and delicious. You down too. Swallow hard. And consider whether you've unlocked a third eye or simply singed your sinuses. The woman who made them laughs and pops one into her mouth without blinking. You pretend to do the same with your third and tuck it discreetly behind your back. Nearby, a pot of millet gruel is being stirred by a child who can barely reach the edge of the cauldron. Millet roams other grayness, a humble staple. No imperial festivals were thrown in its honor, but it filled bellies across the empire. It's cheap, drought, resistant, and forgiving, in a pot. This batch is seasoned with wild herbs and drizzled with a reduction made from pressed grape skins and vinegar. The texture is coarse, like wet sand, but the flavor is surprisingly layered. You spoon it up slowly, eyes watering a little from the garlic's lingering bite. Then someone pulls a twist of cured meat from a cloth pouch, thin slices of dried boar or goat, rubbed in salt and wild thyme. You chew a bit. It's tough but savory, intensely flavorful, and very clearly made with love. Thyme, and no small amount of elbow grease. Salted meats weren't everyday fare here, more like a reward or an inheritance, but when shared among hands that tilled the same soil, they became ceremonial. A celebration without music. A girl hands you a plum. It's bruised but sweet. You bite in, and the juice runs down your chin. Her father, stirring a pot nearby, shrugs and says something about the plum harvest being late this year. That's how it goes in the countryside, everything tied to timing. Weather, the caprice of the gods, and the occasional bad batch of manure, and then, curiously, humbly comes a dish made from old bread, soaked in milk and mashed with figs and a dash of vinegar. It's technically a dessert, but it could pass for porridge if you weren't told otherwise. It's served cold, in clay bowls, eaten with wooden spoons that look whittled from leftover fence posts. The taste is comforting, like the ghost of a fruitcake raised in a barn. This is not the kind of dish Cicero would write poems about. But it fills the space in your stomach where wealthier flavors had briefly camped out. Later, as the workers stretch in the shade and prepare to return to their labor, you help gather up the clay bowls and wipe crumbs from your tunic. One old man chuckles and points at your belt. You've gained a pouch of olives somewhere along the way. You didn't even notice. You thank him anyway. The afternoon heat presses down like a wet wool blanket as the villagers head back to the vineyards and the wheat fields. Their pace is slow, but measured. They've eaten. Not extravagantly, not decadently, but well enough to keep going. In Rome's food hierarchy, they sit closer to the bottom, but they do so with resilience, routine, and a surprisingly refined sense of flavor. You walk away chewing the last piece of salted meat and marveling at how a diet made of scraps and harvest trimmings could somehow taste more complete than the golden banquets of the city. Maybe it's the context. Maybe it's the company. Or maybe the Romans knew something we've forgotten, that food made with intention, eaten in shared silence or shared laughter, can transcend ingredients. Your belly full, your fingers sticky, your mind swimming in chickpeas, lentils, and plums. You head back toward the city as the sun begins to drift behind the hills. Rome isn't finished feeding you yet. You return to the city just as dusk begins stretching its long purple fingers across the skyline. Rome glows gold at this hour, domes and columns bathed in honey-colored light. Shadows lengthening beneath aqueducts and arches, and chimneys puffing the first signs of evening feasts into the cooling air. You breathe deep. Somewhere nearby, someone is roasting onions, and it feels like a welcome home hug from the belly up. Tonight, you're joining a convivium, a Roman dinner party, not hosted by the filthy rich elite, but by a comfortably wealthy merchant who's made just enough coin from grain trade to afford couches, musicians, and garum that doesn't come from a questionable bucket behind the fish stall. You enter through a marble portico into a dim atrium, lit with flickering oil lamps. A slave offers you water scented with rose petals to rinse your hand-standard dinner party pregame. The air buzzes with anticipation, and the floor mosaic features a mythological scene of Dionysus vomiting into a grapevine. Subtle, classy. In the triclinium, the Roman dining room, you recline on a low couch arranged in a U-shape around a table. This is a three-course ordeal: gustatio, prima mensa, and secunda mensa. You're warned. Pace yourself. Your first course arrives on painted ceramic appetizers, so diverse and theatrical, you wonder if the kitchen runs on whimsy alone. You're served stuffed eggs sprinkled with pine nuts and black pepper, wine-soaked dates filled with almond paste, oysters with lovage sauce, and tiny rolls of fish layered with cheese and herbs. Each bite is a new texture, a new spice, a new risk. A servant offers you Mulsuma's sweet wine mixed with honey and spices, and you sip it while watching another guest try to eat a pickled songbird without choking. Romans weren't shy about odd pairings. Salty and sweet, soft and crunchy, fresh and fermented, all wrapped into an edible fever dream. Historians still argue whether this food was meant to impress the palate or the ego. You suspect both. The main course arrives. Dramatically trays, stacked with roasted meats, steaming sausages, and dishes you can't immediately identify. There's pork cooked in milk and bay leaf, chicken glazed with honey and vinegar, and a fish baked in clay and cracked open at the table like a culinary geode. You help yourself to a slice of pork. It's tender, faintly sweet, and seasoned with enough black pepper to make your nose itch. There's also a casserole of dormice stuffed with minced meat, herbs, and chopped nuts. Yes, dormice. You try one, partly out of curiosity, partly out of peer pressure. It's crisp on the outside, soft inside, oddly rich like meat, with a memory of acorn. Across from you, someone eats 3 with alarming speed. You politely decline a second helping, focusing instead on the more familiar bowl of spiced lentils mixed with bits of sausage and onion. The lentils are warm and comforting, to a familiar note in an otherwise adventurous orchestra. Vegetables aren't forgotten here. Roasted parsnips glazed with defrutum, braised cabbage with garum and garlic, chickpeas mashed with leeks and olive. Each dish is carefully arranged, as much about visual pleasure as taste. You dip bread into every sauce, every mash, every pool of oil that survives its meal. It's gluttony with manners. As the main course winds down, hands are washed again with perfumed water. Musicians begin playing flutes, lyres, soft drumming, and a poet stands up to recite something vaguely romantic that involves olives and heartbreak. You use the distraction to sneak one more bite of pickled pear from the edge of the table. Then comes dessert, or rather, segunda mensa, which feels like its own act in a theater of indulgence. First, honey, drenched fritters shaped like tiny birds, crunchy and sticky, disappearing in 2 bites. Then, layered cakes of cheese and poppy seed, alternating with slices of melon and candied orange peel. A dish of pine nuts roasted in honey and sprinkled with sea salt nearly steals the show. Finally, someone passes around a small dish of globulakis curds mixed with flour, fried, and rolled in syrup. You bite in and realize, with a sigh, that the Romans had basically invented donut holes centuries before they'd be branded and boxed in glossy paper. Conversation floats lazily over wine refills and half-finished plates. Topics range from gladiators to politics, to which province has the worst olive oil. Someone claims Britannia's is passable, and the table erupts in laughter. You smile, chewing slowly on a piece of candied fig, feeling time stretch like melted honey. Eventually, the evening softens. Torches flicker. Plates are cleared. The final cups of wine are mulled with cinnamon and saffron. You recline, full but oddly light, suspended in the warm contentment of being neither host nor servant. Just a lucky guest at a meal where every bite tells a story of trade routes, ambition, and absurd culinary daring. As you leave, your host presses a leftover honey cake into your hand, wrapped in fig leaves and tied with twine. For the road, he says. You nod. Too full for words. You step back into the Roman night, heart warm, finger sticky, and belly convinced it might never eat again until the next course appears. You wake to the sound of carts rumbling over stone and the shrill squawks of market hawkers warming up their lungs like gladiators before a match. The Forum Boreum Rome's oldest market buzzes at sunrise, with the kind of chaos that makes you reconsider breakfast. But curiosity always wins. You tug your tunic into place and head straight for the pungent, Beautiful belly of the beast, the morning food market. Stalls line the stone paths like mismatched teeth, each one overflowing with produce. Fish, spices, and animal parts you didn't know could be cooked. An old woman sells garum in reused wine bottles. A boy balances a basket of eggs on his head while shouting about fresh eels. You dodge a runaway goat and land directly in front of a man stacking pyramids of broad beans. He winks, plucks a pod open, and hands you the beans raw. They're green, nuttu, and oddly refreshing, a snack you didn't expect, but suddenly need more of. Breakfast for Rome's working class isn't a sit-down affair. It's snatched, chewed, and chased with water or watered wine while feet keep moving. You pass a bakery with smoke curling from its chimney, and the scent of warm grain pulls you like a magnet. Inside, bread is flying from ovens to baskets in controlled frenzy. You buy a panis plebeius the coarse, bran-heavy loaf preferred by the masses. The crust crackles under your fingers. The inside is warm and spongy. Faintly sour, you dunk it into a vendor's crock of olive oil, and your mouth understands why Romans lined up for this stuff at dawn. A woman at the next stall slices off pieces of salted cheese, made from sheep's milk and rolled in dried herbs. It's firm, salty, and crumbly, perfect with bread. Terrible for the arteries. You buy a chunk, wrap it in fig leaf, and move on with your impromptu Roman breakfast, growing under one arm. You duck into a booth where a young man sells pulse, the eternal Roman porridge, kept hot in a covered pot. His version is made with millet, garlic, wildfennel, and a dollop of mashed chickpeas. He ladles you a portion in a clay bowl. It's earthy, steaming, and about as subtle as a slap-it. You finish it gratefully. For a few sesterces, your belly is full, and your breath could clear a Senate chamber. As you lean against a pillar, sipping spiced wine from a cracked cup, a fisherman offers slices of smoked mackerel, rolled with pickled leeks. The fish is rich, flaky, briny. The leeks punch you in the tongue. Together, they're a breakfast of championcer, of someone with nowhere important to be. You chew and nod, aware that most Romans had never heard the word brunch, but somehow mastered its spiritual essence. Further along, you're handed a skewer of grilled mushrooms brushed with oil and vinegar. A child gives you a plum that's half smashed but still sweet, and a blind man sells candied nuts from a small tray in his lapelmans, roasted in honey and wine until they stick together in golden lumps of joy. You buy too. You regret neither. Markets weren't just about food. They were about spectacle. The shouting, the smells, the elbow injit, all added to the thrill. You see a man juggling eggs for tips. Another hawks a fermented cabbage drink that smells like a mistake, but apparently cures headaches. You take a cautious sip. It tastes like despair with a hint of dill. You hand the rest to a passing goat. There's a stall selling cold leftovers, yesterday's lentils, olive past, bits of grilled fish, hard-boiled eggs. These are scooped into bowls or wrapped in leaves and eaten by builders, cleaners, scribes, anyone with a stomach and 2 coins to rub together. You watch a bricklayer inhale 2 fig cakes, wipe his hands on his tunic, and march off without a word. Efficiency in motion. Someone offers you a slice of honey-glazed semolina cake, cut into a neat square and served with a smile. You try to protest. Your stomach is approaching full rebellion, but your hand accepts it anyway. It's soft, warm, and tastes faintly of almonds and orange blossom. You sigh. Your teeth ache slightly, but your heart hums. You slip through the back of the market, where shadows drape across cracked tile, and old women sell herbs from baskets lined with rags. One hands you a pinch of dried mint and tells you to rub it on your wrists to ward off bad smells and worse luck. You do as she says. Because breakfast in Rome isn't just about food, it's about superstition, rhythm, and a little bit of theatrical charm. Back on the main road, the crowd thickens. Your stomach is full. Your fingers are sticky. Your tunic smells of cheese, garlic, and victory. You've just eaten a working Roman's breakfast cheap, quick, bold, and remarkably satisfying. You didn't need a dining room. You didn't need a seat. You just needed hands, a few coppers, and a willingness to try something pickled and slightly mysterious. As you walk toward the next corner of the city, a baker tosses you a crust of burnt bread. You catch it, laugh, and munch without hesitation. It's hard, smoky, and exactly what you didn't know you wanted. Rome feeds you again, without asking. That's the thing about this city. It's always cooking something. By midday, the sun hangs like a molten coin above the rooftops, and the city begins to slow. You feel it in the air, a brief Roman lull, that sacred moment when stomachs grow heavy and bodies seek shade. You drift toward the Suburra district gritty, vibrant, overflowing with life and laundry, and find a narrow alley that smells of onions, charcoal, and someone's idea of soup. This is where the real lunchtime hustle happens. Today, you're shadowing a tavern cook. Brace yourself. It's hot, loud, and smells like 12 arguments wrapped in garlic. You duck into a papanon of Rome's many working-class taverns, just as a pot slams onto a brazier and someone yells about lentils. The owner, a broad-shouldered woman with soot on her elbows, waves you over with a ladle. She's got 2 dishes on offer today, a boiled grain stew with meat scraps and a fried patty made from leftover beans and stale bread. You take both. Always take both. The grain stew is barley thickened with chicken broth, salty, smoky, full of chewy bits that might be meat or mushrooms, chopped onions, a splash of vinegar, and an enthusiastic dose of lovage give it a flavor that smacks you straight in the memory glands. It's the kind of dish that doesn't look like much but somehow makes your toes curl. Then comes the bean patty, still sizzling from the pan. Mashed chickpeas mixed with garlic, herbs, and old bread-shaped. Fried, served with a drizzle of oil and a fistful of pickled radish on the side. You bite in. Crunchy edges, soft center, sharp pickle. You nod in approval. The tavern woman grins. That was breakfast for Caesar's stable boys, she says. You suspect she's yoking, but the image is delightful. You wash it all down with Pasquarome's humble beverage of vinegar, water, and herbs. It's no wine, but it's cold and bracing. And after 2 sips, your throat stops sticking. It was a soldier's drink, a laborer's drink, a tavern staple that hydrated a million calloused hands. Next comes a surprise: pickled eggplant. Cut thin, soaked in vinegar, layered with mint and crushed coriander. You've never tasted anything quite like it. It's sharp, herbal, oddly floral. The texture is slippery, but not in a bad way. You eat 3 slices before asking what else is on the menu. The answer: whatever's left over, burned, or caught in the net this morning. You learn that taverns didn't operate like modern restaurants. There's no chalkboard menu, no little scroll listing dishes of the day. Food is whatever the owner could find cheap that morning, cooked fast and sold to whoever could pay. Sometimes you get lentils. Sometimes you get stewed snails in fish sauce. Sometimes you get both in the same bowl. If you're lucky, there's a dollop of honey involved. You watch as a boy carries out bowls of boiled cabbage, limp, but seasoned with pepper and oil. Another table gets a flatbread topped with mashed peas and dried onion, early ancestor of pizza. If you squint hard enough, you ask for one. It's humble, fragrant, and leaves green smears on your chin. Over in the corner, a man eats cold tripe mixed with vinegar and celery leaf. You don't ask for a bite, but he offers anyway. You try it. It's chewy, sour, and tastes like bravery. You nod respectfully and return to your barley stew. Then comes dessert, or at least what passes for it here: a slab of libum, a small cheesecake made from ricotta, flour, and egg, baked on a bay leaf and served warm. You break it apart with your fingers. It's dense, creamy, faintly sweet. The bay leaf leaves a ghost of bitterness that somehow makes it better. You chase it with another swig of posca, just to confuse your taste buds one last time. The tavern's noise swells as workers file in for lunch. Someone sings. Someone drops a pot. Someone yells something about turnips. It's chaotic and beautiful. And you realize this sweaty, bustling space with clattering clay bowls and sizzling chickpea pateasis, the Roman heart. Not the Senate, not the temples, but here, where food is fast, loud, messy, and deeply alive. As you wipe your fingers on a scrap of cloth and stand to leave, the tavern woman tosses you a slice of honey-soaked bread wrapped in fig leaf. For later, she says. Or now. You tuck it into your belt and step back into the street, blinking in the sunlight. Outside, the city is already waking up from its nap. Merchants call, carts creak. A musician plays a tune you think might be about fish. You chew your honey bread slowly, letting the flavor linger as dust settles on your sandals. Rome, once again, has fed you, not with silver spoons or delicate sauces, but with real food from real handsgrain, garlic, vinegar, and just enough sweetness to make you forget the heat. You keep walking, stomach full, mind buzzing, and mouth still tasting of bay leaf and barley. You drift into the quieter side of Rome now, where the clamor of the forum fades into the rustle of laundry, the clack of sandals over mosaic thresholds, and the low hum of evening kitchens warming to life. The insulatho's tall, often precarious apartment blocks tower around you, like stacked loaves of bread, full of smells, voices, and food being coaxed from nearly nothing. You've eaten with merchants and farmers, reclined at rich tables, and squatted in smoky taverns. But now it's time to see what dinner looks like when you're living in a cramped fourth-floor flat with a leaky roof and exactly 3 utensils to your name. A woman waves you up a narrow staircase, so steep it could pass for punishment. You arrive breathless, just in time to see her toss onion tops and dried lentils into a bubbling pot. Tonight's meal is typical of Rome's working poor, pulse again, but thinner than the countryside version, stretched with cabbage leaves, a clove of garlic, and a splash of whatever broth she managed to scrape together. It's barely more than soup, but it smells like salvation in liquid form. Her husband stomps in from work, a carpenter with calloused hands and a face like a chipped statue. He drops a bag on the floor inside. 2 stale rolls, a hunk of sheep's cheese, and a small bundle of dried olives. Dinner. Supplément édition. The rolls get dunked directly into the pot, softening into dumpling-like lumps. You get a bowl. 2. It's warm, salty, and alive with sharp garlic and sour greens. You blow on your spoon before each bite, like it's per-thousand it is. The couple shares their olive oil sparingly, drizzling just enough over the top to make the stew glisten. Then comes the cheese crumbled over everything, melting into the heat, adding that sour tang Romans loved even before refrigeration made it practical. You scoop it up with a crust of bread, have slowly, and listen as a neighbor haggles over turnips through the window. These households don't have space for fancy courses. Dinner is 1 pot, 1 spoon per person, and 1 chance to stretch ingredients like a magician stretching a coin. And yet, there's comfort here. You laugh as the wife pulls out a handful of dried apricots, lightly wrinkled, dusted in flour, but still fragrant hand presses them into your palm. Dessert. You chew, and the sweet tart flavor cuts through the lentils like a gift from Bacchus himself. In another insula, you visit a family with 4 children, 2 sleeping mats, and 1 shared hearth. Their meal, mashed peas with garlic and mint, served cold on flatbread. The peas are smashed until creamy, seasoned with vinegar and just a bit of coriander. The bread is stiff and scorched in places, but together, it's food. The children gobble their portions, chasing every bite with swigs of watered wine. One of them hands you a fried turnip slice, like it's a precious gem. You take it. You bite. It tastes like effort and a little too much salt. A grandmother pulls a jar from beneath the sleeping mat pickled leeks she made during the last festival. She stabs one with a wooden pin and offers it with solemnity. You chew it slowly, appreciating the strong vinegar tang and the memory it carries. Romans didn't just eat for nutrition, they ate to remember, to share, to connect the daily grind with something just a little more beautiful. Later, someone invites you onto the rooftop of the insula. The view is cracked tile and laundry flapping like lazy flags. But up here, dinner is shared among neighbor scraps of barley bread, a handful of chickpeas roasted until crisp, leftover carrots cooked down with vinegar and honey. One man brings out a pot of porridge flavored with old wine and wild thyme. It's purple-gray, steaming, and tastes far better than it looks. As the sun slips behind the skyline, you sit on the edge of the roof and break bread with strangers who live 5 to a room and still save the good olives for guests. You drink watered wine from a chipped cup and chew slowly, grateful for the breeze and the basil sprig someone threw into the pot just because they could. No gold plates, no flutes, just stories, shared pots, and the rhythm of spoons scraping clay bowls. Historians still argue whether Rome's poor lived on the edge of famine or within a tight web of communal resilience. Tonight, it feels like the latter. When you leave, the grandmother presses a tiny cake into your hand, barley flour and honey. Baked hard, almost like a biscuit. For later, she says, like all Roman hosts do. You tuck it into your satchel, nod, and descend the crooked stairs, full of stew and sky. Below, a boy sells figs by torchlight. You buy one, bale it, and let the syrupy flesh coat your tongue. It's not fancy, but it's Roman. And tonight, that's more than enough. You walk through moonlit alleys now, belly stretched, sandals worn, breath slowed to match the lull of a city winding down. But Rome doesn't ever fully sleep, she just flickers. Somewhere beyond the Aventine, a fire still burns beneath a cookpot, and you follow the scent like a trail of breadcrumbs. It leads you to a food stand nestled beside a public bathhouse, where steam curls from wall vents and the streets still carry echoes of the day's footsteps. This late-night stall caters to night shift workers, bathhouse attendants, guards, and those who simply never cared for early dinners. And tonight, you're one of them. The vendor greets you with a grunt and a wooden spoon. On offer, fried fish cakes, a pot of mashed parsnips spiced with cumin, and a sticky rice dish that looks suspiciously ambitious. You take one of each. The fish cakes are crisp, packed with herbs and tiny anchovies that pop like salt bombs when you chew. They're served with a splash of vinegar and a smear of fermented leek paste that smells awful and tastes complex. You hesitate before the second bite, then finish it anyway. The mashed parsnips are earthy and smooth, sweetened with just enough honey to make them addictive. Someone asks for a dollop on barley bread, eats it in 2 bites, and nods, like he's made peace with the gods. You try the same. You understand his epiphany. The rice dish? Well, rice is rare, in Rome mostly imported from the East, and treasured for its novelty. This version has been simmered with saffron, milk, and pine nuts, then pressed into squares and seared for texture. You bite in. It's soft, floral, gently sweet, and deeply foreign, like eating an edible poem written by someone from a different empire. Historians still argue whether dishes like this were local experiments or lifted from the kitchens of traders and diplomats. Either way, it's delicious. A man beside you sips hot lentil broth from a cracked bowl. It's spiced with asafoetida and coriander. Smoky and medicinal. Exactly what a long day demands. He dunks a hunk of bread into the broth, slurps it noisily, and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand like a philosopher who just solved hunger. The vendor passes around fig leaf-wrapped parcels filled with cheese and herbs. They're baked into soft triangles, edges crisped by flame, insides warm and salty. You try one, and instantly burn your tongue. Worth it. As you fan your mouth, someone hands you a cup of calda vinum hot wine mixed with honey and spices. You sip, It flows down like silk and settles into your bones like a heated blanket. Even at this hour, food is still performance. A woman fries chickpea flour fritters in oil, flipping them mid-air with a wooden spatula. They land with satisfying sizzles, then are dusted with pepper and handed out to waiting hands. You get 2. They crunch, then yield to creamy middles, and you find yourself wishing you had space for 4. Behind the stall, a man cracks walnuts with a stone and sprinkles the crushed nuts over small bowls of dates and soft cheese. He hands one to you wordlessly. You spoon it up, slowly salty, sweet, sticky, and alive with texture. It's a Roman trifle without ceremony. And then, because this is Rome and restraint is a suggestion, someone starts carving roasted fruit from a spit quinces glazed in wine syrup and stuffed with dried currants. You accept a slice. The skin peels away like silk. The inside is hot, tart, and buttery soft. You close your eyes for a moment longer than you meant to. The stall begins winding down. Bowls scraped clean. Bread baskets emptied. You lean against a post and sip the last of your hot wine, to the taste of fish cakes and parsnips still lingering. Across the square, the baths begin to empty. Steam snakes across the stone like ghosts heading home. And it's here, among the leftovers and the clatter of closing pots, that you realize how Roman food never really stops. It adapts, stretches, reappears, morning to midnight, rich to poor, perfumed with garum or dusted in a sheech bite, is stitched into the rhythm of survival and pleasure. You help gather up used bowls and stack them near the wash basin. The vendor nods. "Come back tomorrow," he says. "Might have snail stew." You raise an eyebrow, unsure whether that's a threat or a promise. But you smile, because you probably will come back. Rome always lures you with something new in a familiar pot. As you walk through the dark streets, fig leaf parcel still warm in your satchel. Your thoughts are soft and slow. You've eaten your way through class divisions, feast tables, rooftops, alleys, and bathhouse corners, and each meal has been its own quiet revolution. Your stomach is full. Your sandals are worn. And somewhere deep within, your soul feels a little roasted, a little pickled, a little glazed in honey, just the way the Romans liked it. Your feet carry you down the Palatine Hill now, where the ghost of empire still lingers in moon-pale columns and broken marble teeth. The elite once feasted Heracinators, patricians, and emperors dripping with power and pomegranate molasses. You pass under arches engraved with forgotten victories, wondering what supper tasted like for those at the very top. Tonight, you're going to find out. Even if it means slipping behind gilded doors or nodding along with someone in an absurdly expensive toga, you arrive at the domus of a retired general turned senator, who greets you with oiled hair, a leopard print couch, and a table set with more silver than sense. He claps once, and out comes the first course gustatio, the showy start of Roman fine dining. On offer, boiled quail's eggs dyed with beet juice, little skewers of hummingbird tongues in saffron, and jelly made from sea urchin and pine resin. You blink. The senator laughs. "It's not for everyone," he says. You nod politely and swallow what might be your dignity. The eggs are rich and earthy, the jelly, oddly floral, and the tongues. Heavy. There's a dish of roasted dormice stuffed with nuts and honey, served reclining on laurel leaves. You take one bite. Just one. And it's like a fig grew legs and went to culinary school. You stare at your wine cup, wondering if you're in love or just full of protein. The second course, prima mensa, arrives like a Roman cavalry, charge platters heaving with roasted meats, exotic sauces, and whole fish gilded with edible gold leaf. The centerpiece, a wild boar glazed with honey and mustard, its mouth stuffed with live thrushes that flap out in surprise when the chef carves it open. You jump. The senator laughs again. Entertainment, he says. Sipping wine, the color of sunsets, you get slices of duck simmered in cherry sauce, pheasant with black pepper and date syrup, and lamb wrapped in fig leaves and roasted over citrus wood. Each bite melts or crunches or explodes with some new spice cinnamon. Asafoetida, ground rose petals. You try everything once and go back for the lamb 3 times. It's warm, savory, and smells like a kiss you weren't expecting. Vegetables appear too, but in costume carrots pickled in myrtle wine, turnips glazed with honey and garum, asparagus served with a custard-like cheese sauce thick enough to patch a wall. Nothing is subtle. Everything is intentional. Even the lentils are served chilled in molded shapes. With dots of vinegar jelly, you poke it. It wobbles. You eat it anyway, throughout the meal. Slaves bring warm towels, scented with myrrh, and bowls of rose water for rinsing fingers. You feel absurdly clean and equally sticky. The senator, now reclining deeply, snaps his fingers for dessert. Secunda mensa begins with spiced wine syrup, poured over snow brought from mountain ice houses. It tastes like sugar, effort, and subtle class warfare. Next, a tray of sweet cakes shaped like animals, lions, doves, dolphin sole made from flour, honey, and date paste. You bite into a dolphin and taste almond, citrus, and ambition. Then come baked apples stuffed with nuts, raisin, and cheese, drizzled in saffron syrup and torched tableside with a long spoon dipped in flame. You almost clap. Finally, someone brings out candied violets, sugar-crusted olives, and a fermented milk jelly that smells like cheese but tastes like flowers. You're not sure whether to thank it or apologize to it. Historians still argue whether this dessert was a status symbol, a palate cleanser, or just a dare in solid form. Wine flows like river water, throughout infused with rose petals, myrrh, pepper, and herbs you can't pronounce. You're drunk before you realize it, lounging like you were born to recline, licking date syrup from your fingers and wondering how many people it takes to prepare a meal like this. Probably 20, maybe 50, certainly more than are invited to eat it. The senator drones on about something senatorial reform, grain taxes, his favorite kind of garumbit. You're drifting. The air is thick with incense and roasted onion. Your belly is a warm amphora of contradictions. You've eaten like an emperor. You feel like a stuffed dormouse. Eventually, the meal ends not with a bang, but with a sigh. Someone hands out mint leaves to chew. and you pretend it's enough to fix your breath. As you stand, the senator claps again. A slave hands you a parcel wrapped in silka, parting gift of candied nuts and what might be preserved pear. For your walk home, he says, winking like this isn't the fifth feast he's hosted this week. You step out into the quiet night. The wind cool against your flushed face. The taste of saffron and songbird still clinging to your molars. Rome, in all its indulgence, has shown you her full spread from tenement rooftops to velvet banquets. And, while this meal was absurd, extravagant, and possibly illegal in 12 provinces, you can't help but feel a little dazzled. You bite into a candied nut as you walk, chewing slowly, savoring the salt and honey. The texture, the work it must have taken to make something so small taste like this. Rome is a city of flavor, sometimes overwhelming, often strange, always unforgettable. You wake up late, with the hazy weight of a feast still fogging your memory. There's fig syrup on your sleeve, a pine nut in your sandal, and the lingering ghost of saffron behind your eyes. But Rome waits for no stomach, and the city's daily appetite rumbles to life once more. Today, you're heading out beyond the Gatesto, the fields, the farms, the edges of empire, where the people who feed the capital are eating simpler, stranger things. This is Roman rustic life, and your breakfast is going to smell like dirt, goat, and yesterday's fire. The road winds through dusty hills, olive trees bending under their silvery leaves, and fig orchards, so thick with sweetness the air buzzes with bees. You arrive at a Villa Rustica countryside estate run by freedmen and slaves, producing everything from wine to grain to questionable sausages. The steward greets you with a nod and a bowl of boiled millet porridge. It's plain, painfully so, but he hands you a cube of cheese, hardened by sun and age, and you crumble it in. Suddenly, the porridge has personality. Out here, meat is rare, salt is precious, and time moves like olive oil, slow, heavy, slightly golden. Meals are built on what survives the fields. Lunch is simple, stale bread revived with water and oil, a handful of green olives, and onions roasted whole in ash. You peel them like gifts. Their insides, soft, sweet, and so strong they make your eyes water retroactively. You dip your bread in the oil left on the hearthstone and chew slowly, each bite grounding you in the earth, in the smoke, in the labor of food that grows by sun and survives by miracle. The workers eat in shifts, some standing, some squatting on baskets. A girl hands you a skewer of roasted chickpeas, still hot from the fire. Another passes around dried apple slices dipped in vinegar and thyme. You try them all. The apples are chewy and sharp. The chickpeas are crisp, then nutty, then gone. Later in the day, you're shown the Solara cool, damp room, lined with amphorae and hung with strings of garlic, onions, and dried herbs. Clay pots, filled with pickled vegetables, sit beside wine jars, sealed with resin and marked with ink symbols. A man cracks one open and offers a sip. It's sharp, smoky, full of floating herb stems, and almost definitely alive. You drink anyway. For dinner, you sit near the fire pit with the shepherds, A pot of lentils bubbles with scraps of fatty mutton, wild greens, and farro. The shepherd stirs with a stick and throws in a pinch of salt like it's a love letter. You're handed a wooden bowl and a crust of rye bread to scoop with. The soup is hearty, peppery, and tastes like cold wind and warm wool. You ask what the greens are, and they shrug. Whatever grows. Huh. Dessert comes in the form of honeycomb, broken off the hive. Served with rough cheese and thick barley biscuits, you bite into the honeycomb, and the wax gives before the golden flood rushes out. It's wild, floral, sticky. The cheese is sour. The biscuit is dry. But together, it's oddly divine. You smear one on the other, like some ancient ancestor of cheesecake. Out here, they eat seasonally, sauvage, smartly. Nothing is wasted. Grape skins become vinegar. Fish bones, flavor, soup. Old bread is soaked, fried, or fed to ducks that will one day feed them back. It's a cycle. Brutal, elegant, practical. Before you leave, a boy runs after you with a bundle wrapped in cloth-pickled plums, dried figs, and a single boiled egg. For your walk, he says, like everyone in Rome's ever-growing kitchen. You smile, tuck it into your satchel, and wave goodbye as you head back down the dusty road toward the city lights. Even on the edge of empire, the Roman tongue finds ways to celebrate through sour apples, smoked lentils, bitter greens, and sweet figs dried in the sun like small promises. It's not about excess here. It's about getting fed and feeding others. Even when the fields are dry and the pigs are stubborn, as the sun dips behind the hills and the wind carries with it the smell of garlic and grain, you chew a pickled plum slowly, savoring its tartness, and feel for the 100th time in this journey that Roman food is less about what you eat and more about how it pulls people together with bowls, bread, and a little luck. Night descends again. Slower this time, like a blanket being shaken over a tired world. You cross back into the city under an orange sky, where shadows stretch long and everything glows in firelight or flickering torch. The markets are mostly closed. The food stalls are quieter. Rome, for once, exhales. But not you, not yet. One last meal awaits before the journey ends. A final taste to sum up this long, strange, delicious trip through the kitchens, alleys, villas, and banquet halls of the ancient empire. You find yourself invited to a small gathering at the home of a poet not wealthy, but clever, connected, and obsessed with flavor. His atrium smells of citrus and ink. He wears a robe that's more patched than fabric and greets you like an old friend. The table is already laid out with mismatched bowls and chipped plates, each one holding something homemade, foraged, or questionably sourced. This is dinner for the artist, class improvised, experimental, and deeply opinionated. There's barley flatbread topped with pureed lentils, garlic, and chopped dates. Surprisingly good. There's a fish paste made from smoked sardines and lemon zest, spread over slices of roasted turnip, like it's bruschetta for philosophers. There's even a salad of wild herbs, bitter and tart, tossed with pickled grape skins and shards of hard cheese. It's aggressive, but your tongue appreciates the workout. The poet serves you a stew that defies identification. It started as eel, he says, smiling. Then it became a story. You eat it anyway. It's full of root vegetables, onion, cumin, and something sour that might be wine or regret. It's deeply good. You clean your bowl with a hunk of bread and ask for more. The final course is a kind of fruit custard-baked apple blended with soft cheese, honey, and crushed walnuts, served in tiny clay bowls with tiny wooden spoons. You eat it in silence, amazed at how humble ingredients can taste like a memory you never had. Around you, the others talk politics, art, and whose cousin got caught stealing figs from the governor's orchard. You lean back, content, and let the conversation float over you like music. As the gathering thins, someone brings out an amphora of strong wine infused with bay leaves and clove. The poet raises a toast to food, to Rome, to those who know the difference between filling the stomach and feeding the soul. You clink cups. You drink. The warmth settles in your chest and stays there. You slip out into the night, walking slowly, deliberately, past the empty market stalls where garlic skins still cling to the stone, past the temples and bathhouses and fountains where the day's heat still radiates from marble, past the tenements where laughter drifts from windows and bread bakes on rooftops. All of it smells like life complex, imperfect, seasoned with ash and honey. You pass a boy selling pine nuts from a woven tray. You buy a small handful, chewing them one at a time, as you wind through Rome's belly for the last time. This journey has been absurd, overwhelming, wildly flavorful. You've eaten with nobles and laborers, with cooks and shepherds, with poets and tavern brawlers. You've tasted garum and honey cake, barley and bay leaf, snails and stories. Historians still argue whether Roman cuisine was driven by necessity, by trade, or by sheer culinary madness. But you've lived it. And the answer is yes. All of it, as you reach the edge of the city. Satchel, heavy, with stolen cheese and kindness. You sit on a worn stone and breathe in the warm, spiced air. Somewhere, a fig falls from a tree. Somewhere, bread is rising. Somewhere, someone is grinding pepper over a pot and tasting, adjusting, hoping. Rome doesn't feed you gently. She feeds you fiercely. But if you listen close, if you chew slowly, if you dare the jellyfish and the pickled leek paste and the porridge that smells like boots, you'll realize it was never just about survival. It was always about sharing. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your stomach quiets, it's time to settle down, with all those flavors still whispering on your tongue of garlic. In fig, vinegar, and laughter, and let the night swallow them into dreams. So now, just for a moment, let your body rest. Picture yourself reclining beneath the stars, the last embers of a Roman hearth flickering low, the taste of warm honey still resting faintly behind your teeth. The streets are quiet. The laughter has faded. The smells of roasted grain and aged wine cling to the air like lullabies from an ancient world. You feel the stone beneath you, smooth and cool, grounding you gently after such a long, strange, delicious journey. Your breath slows. Your limbs feel heavier. But in that good way, the way they do after a day well spent, after a meal well earned. You've walked through villas and alleys, markets and fields, sat with peasants and poets, and tasted history in every bite. And now, Rome herself seems to exhale. The lamps dim behind curtained windows. A dog shifts in its sleep. The distant hum of a fountain barely breaks the silence. There's nothing left to chase tonight. No more stews or cheeses or songs, only stillness. Only the comfort of knowing you've wandered the empire, belly first, and come home full, not just of food, but of stories, people, and the slow, sacred rhythm of meals shared in company. Let your breath deepen. Let the last of the fig sweetness melt away. Let your thoughts quiet, like the coals in that final kitchen. You're safe now. Full. At peace. Sweet dreams.